across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk Across.
And good afternoon. Yeah, thank you to Peter Cardwell. He's back tomorrow, of course, right here on Talk. There's a lot to get through. A teenage killer who murdered a 12-year-old boy in Birmingham. You'll be familiar with this horrific story. Has been described by police as somebody who enjoyed hurting people and targeted deliberately vulnerable victims. Now, this is a pattern increasingly seen in child-on-child killings. The 15-year-old pleaded guilty to the murder as he walked the murder of Leo Ross as he walked home from school, and detectives said the attack was violence for its own sake. What is behind the rise in child killers? It's a disturbing subject, but certainly when we see so many horrific headlines, we are forced to ask those questions. We'll look at that in a few moments. Also, the BBC has been urged to stop box-ticking casting that shoehorns ethnic minority actors into period dramas, according to a damning independent review. The report also warns the corporation must do more to represent the working classes and women over 60s if they want to keep their audience engaged. And councillors have revolted after Labour cancelled local elections for 4.6 million people. You're familiar with this story, of course, sparking claims of democratic outrage. Norfolk County Council has been hit by resignations in protest, while the leader of one council has stepped down. If councillors decide to step down en masse, Labour could have a rather big issue on its hands. We'll look at that story as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk. 0344 499 1000. I want to start with this, and there's the reasons I think why this is important will become obvious. The teenage killer that we just mentioned there, who murdered a 12-year-old boy in Birmingham, simply enjoyed hurting people and had a history of targeting vulnerable victims. He was 14 when this took place, and some of his crimes predate that age. His victim, the boy, who cannot be named or identified for legal reasons. We understand all of that, but this was him talking to the police. It was picked up by the police on the day that his victim, the body of Leo Ross, was found.
As I was looking at it, I didn't touch him because that could put me in that case. I was seeing her, she was walking there. So then,
this lad who came through.
Yes, so I came and got her to call the police, and then I went and got him, and then him. He was laying there like that when I got here, and that's all I know about it.
It wasn't all he knew about it, of course, because the 15-year-old pleaded guilty to murder at Birmingham Crown Court yesterday. He fatally stabbed Leo Ross in the stomach as he made his way home from school. This was January, almost a year today, 21st of January last year. Detective Inspector Joe Davenport said the teenager would carry out violence for violence's sake. He enjoyed hurting people, enjoyed watching the chaos that then unfolded. And before the murder, and we now know this detail, the teenager had attacked people in the same area on the couple of days leading up to Leo's murder. The same day that he killed Leo, a horrendous incident where he beat an elderly woman with her walking stick and then threw her into a river. The police said he knew he could beat and easily overpower people. Children, killing children. The most infamous case, of course, and you're probably ahead of me on this, is that of James Bulger in 1993. Now, this understandably absolutely shook the nation to its core. I don't need to run over the details other than to say that the horror became even more disturbing when we eventually heard the voices of the killers in that original police interview. Have a listen.
What was it you told us?
That I killed James. So we walked up to him and we were walking around with him and I took his hand.
And whose idea was it to walk towards him?
Mine.
Was it?
Then it was Robert's idea to kill him.
I mean, it is so awful to hear that, but compounded by the fact that these are little children themselves. We could go on, of course. Two 12-year-old boys convicted of murder in 2023 in Wolverhampton. Horrendous case of Sean Cisahay, apologies, who was the victim of a machete attack in a park. They became known as some of the youngest knife murderers in modern UK history. And of course, after that, they had their minimum sentences increased. Days earlier, another part of the country, Alfie Lewis, 15, stabbed to death by a 14-year-old outside a primary school in Leeds. 2017, the killer, the 15-year-old girl who killed 7-year-old Katie Ruff in Yorkshire. The perpetrator was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility rather than murder due to mental health issues. Ricky Neve, another just horrific case. 13-year-old James Watson strangled six-year-old Ricky Neve in Peterborough in 1994. Of course, that case was never convicted until 28 years later in 2022 after new DNA evidence emerged. And you can add to that horrific list. Look, homicides apparently overall have gone down, not significantly, but this is interesting. The percentage of homicide convictions going to under 16s compared with other age groups has doubled in 10 years. So of all murders, 1 in 50 were carried out by those under 16. In 2012, 1 in 50. By 2022, that figure was 1 in 25, a doubling. I'm going to ask, what is behind that? What do you sense is behind that? In the same way, and I think there is arguably a correlation, although one is not clearly in anywhere near the same ballpark. But we have a rise in neurodivergency, okay, whether that's kids with autism, ADHD, and all the various other issues that may affect young people. We have a rise in that, but simultaneously we have a rise in kids whose condition, whatever that happens to be, takes them further. Now, ordinarily, when a 10-year-old does something bad, we sort of go, well, he's 10, he'll be all right, you know, okay, kick the flower pot over of the next door neighbour. You write it off as that. If a 10-year-old, an 11-year-old, 12-year-old, young teenagers are killing other kids, you are forced to not unreasonably ask the question, is this an act of, are these kids evil? You might say, well, by definition, look at what you've done, that's evil, right? But do we still continue with a sympathy over the fact that some of these kids are so young? And the James Bolger case was the one that really, I mean, you had people screaming, saying these kids, these perpetrators should be hanged for what they're, shot at dawn for what they've done. And they were like 10 years old at the time. And for those who've got or have had a 10-year-old, you know how little and young that still is. But what they did was so brutal and in many cases so considered in terms of its levels of violence against a 2-year-old child. You look at this and think, well, how else do you deal with that? What's with the increase in this? Are we just an angrier nation? Have we got angrier parents who are therefore bringing up kids without any kind of guidance or guidelines, who are witness and subject to generally an initial life of malaise and disruption that is so bad that it turns them that way? What is going on? And these cases, I mean, I mentioned a machete attack. A machete attack. The case of Sean Cisahay that happened in 2023 in Wolverhampton. Killed by a machete. 2 12-year-old boys. I mean, what the hell is going on? 0344 499 1000. I appreciate this is a fairly dark subject to be talking about, and nobody wants to think of their own kids being in a situation where they might go so far off the beaten track they become something that you would never, ever, in your wildest, most horrific nightmares, have imagined your kid would end up doing. I guess every parent at some point thought that. These young teenagers, half an hour ago, were running around in a field in a nappy, larking around in the garden, kicking a football, playing with the dog, being mischievous, you know, little monkeys and all the rest of it. Fast forward just a few years, and they are killers, and barbaric killers too. Why? What the heck is going on? Let's get a word on this and the other big stories of the day. Claire Muldoon, the broadcaster, is back with us. Good to see you, Claire. How are you?
And you, Ian. Lovely to see you. Really nice, albeit virtually.
Indeed. This is, obviously, these stories are deeply disturbing.
They are.
For years, psychiatrists and child psychologists and social, everybody's trying to work out, is it something in the water? Not to cheapen the point. Is there something environmental about this? Does the gene pool just once in a while throw up kids who want to do horrible stuff? What is going on?
Well, yes to all of that, but I think a very salient point is the fact these children are evil. Evil. You cannot even mitigate anything. You can't put things down to being neurodiverse. But what I think we can do as a society is actually catch these kids sooner than later. Years ago, they used to have a system of children's panels whereby if a child were to present with some really discerning issues with them in terms of the way they behave, their behaviour. It's often said that children who are violent towards pets or animals are more likely to be killers later on in life. Yep. And when we read, and don't forget Brianna Jai as well, that child who was murdered by two children that she was supposed to be friendly with. There is so much of this going around, and I think there's so much violent crime exacerbated by online video games, online violent porn, and there's an awful lot of things that children are exposed to now that they weren't ever supposed to, and that's reflected in, I think, the statistics that you used earlier. 2012, 1 in 50, and now moving up to 1 in 25. Yeah. The lack of the breakdown of family values, the lack of role models in society, the lack of education, because I think we put children's needs and what they present with at a higher grade than what we should be selling them. We should be saying, calling out bad behaviour. We should be able to deal with it, and now we're not. So we see children like that young boy who murdered and admitted murder in Birmingham court. Was it yesterday? And was actually found guilty of it, Ian. This is horrific. This is heinous. This is evil. Now, there are many victims in this, notwithstanding that poor boy who was murdered at 12, Leo's parents, his extended family and his friendship group. That's awful. But we often overlook sometimes the victims of the perpetrators themselves. Do we think John Venables or Robert Thompson's family have ever got over the horrific death of Jamie Bulger, notwithstanding clearly Bulger's parents who didn't? Why would they? Because I couldn't even envisage anything like that happening to any of mine. But we really need to take stock, and I think there are identifiable character traits in these children, and I think that has to be dealt with. I think we need to improve social services because they are pushed to the limit. And whilst I also believe that we can't actually mitigate or legislate against these things happening, because we can't. Look at Baby P, for instance. We can't keep blaming systems that aren't put in place for evil that actually happens. But what we can do is try and make it a lot safer and a lot better and a lot more healthy, I think, for everybody involved. And we need to start taking action. We need to start identifying issues with behaviour. And I think we can see, I mean, that boy who committed the murder against poor Leo Ross, as you said, days before, he battered an old lady with her own walking stick and pushed her into a river. Now, this chap was caught because of the DNA on the knife that he used to kill Leo Ross. Now, was his DNA on a database? How on earth did the police know? How did Davenport know that it was him?
And does this, there is a lot of people getting in touch, understandably, saying, look, you can analyse this forever. You can look at rotten parents. You can look at, the most horrific levels of what neurodivergence, when it goes into a whole new stratosphere, looks like. You can look at that. You could just have to conclude that the human gene pool will throw up some bad people. Don't overanalyze, that's it. I think that's an easy answer because I think there is more to this.
Well, there is more to it, but unless we actually get a grip on it, Ian, and you can, Starmer can stand and say, we will roll out the drama of adolescence into every single school, because that was put down to misogyny, that was down to young men in cells not being able to, communicate their emotions. I mean, that has got nothing to do with that. You cannot get rid of evil. What you can do is try and get, I mean, remember there used to be borstals. There used to be places for young children that were clearly mentally disturbed, and that's what it is. And that is the root of it. I mean, you can use bad parenting, you can use environmental factors, you can even throw in poverty to that. But there are a lot more there's a lot more going on, and we need to, as a society, get a grip of it. And I think we should stop allowing children's feelings and wants and whatever above what is right and what is wrong. And I think that's been lost, Ian.
And I
it's
think
been lost in schools and in society.
It really has. Look, there's always going to be cases of kids who've done terrible things who did come from a nice background.
Of course there are.
But mostly in these kind of cases, these kids are from terrible backgrounds with, you know, their parents, I don't want to say losers, but they're just not parents, really. They just happen to have a kid, and that kid was in a holding pen in a house, never told right from wrong, didn't matter whether they went to school, had no manners, didn't know how to be polite. Nothing.
I still believe, but if that was the case, then, Ian, by extension, every child like that would end up with some violence attached to them, and show that violence in heinous crimes like we've just seen for poor Leah Ross. But I think it's deeper than that, because I think these children themselves do have, everyone has, an inherent sense of what's right and what's wrong. And that's the problem.
Well, it's that, isn't it? Because you think, despite whatever your background is, whatever your circumstances, everybody must know of any age almost, that you wouldn't go out with a machete and start hacking someone up. You don't need to come from an opulent background to know that is the case.
Exactly.
Claire, stay with us. Go on, carry on.
And he knew what he was doing by the police reports, because he loved being violent. He got a kick out of it. He
enjoyed violence, which is just, you know, compounds the kind of disturbing nature of all of this. Stay with us, Claire. More to come from Claire Muldoon, some other stories. We're throwing out that question because I think it is genuinely a fascinating, it's disturbing, it's not always easy, but it's certainly a fascinating question and conversation of our times, because there is an increase in this. What is behind the rise in child killers? What is going on when society is breeding kids that want to go out and kill other kids? I mean, sometimes kill adults, but killing other kids, you know, the most vulnerable. We've seen the horrific cases. I just listed, half a dozen, if that. And there are so many more out there. And why have the numbers doubled in the last 10 years? What the heck is happening to our society? 0344 499 1000.
Did say, no, the rights of the asylum seekers are above the rights of the British people.
Shabana Mahmood is going onto these media channels and saying that she's been engaging with communities, engaging with police. She's engaged with no one.
The latest is that Brooklyn could be set to sign a 7-figure book deal, and it's the same publisher as Prince Harry's Spare. That makes me shudder.
And we are
Scary wasn't there, so I'm going to step in. I'm here, I'm ready for it. Nigel, I'm sorry, I'm joining the Spice Girls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one comes in from Luke, who says, afternoon, Ian. I personally believe that these crimes we're talking about, children, the rise in child killers, don't happen in a vacuum. The breakdown of the traditional family unit, poor parenting, the lack of consequences will only lead to more crimes of all ages. There's no accountability, no real discipline, no deterrent, and it's always somebody else's fault. Yeah, there's always, I think, with these particular crimes, there is always a bit more to it than just the horror of the actual crime. I think we can safely say that. And you look at the backgrounds, the upbringings of some of these kids, and look, I'm not going to say it's no wonder they go on to do terrible things with machetes, because I think that's another level. But you have to kind of understand why a kid who's been given absolutely zero guidance goes on to be perhaps a wrong 'un or troubled at the very least. Let's move to this story. Claire Muldoon is with us, the broadcaster and friend of this show. It's the BBC back in the news, Claire. It's an absolute beauty, this one, because we have a little giggle at this from time to time, but there's also a serious side to it. This is the Independent Review that is urging the BBC to stop box ticking by casting ethnic minorities who are not right for the role. Just in order to tick a box. And there's all sorts of examples from Great Expectations, Henry VIII. The list goes on where they've thought, I know, we're going to get somebody to play Henry VIII, so we'll get a black guy to play Henry VIII. And there is a sense, well, OK, actors are meant to be versatile, but that is just a bit too odd. Why would you want that? I mean, the obvious answer, you wouldn't get a white guy to play Nelson Mandela, but the BBC seem to love this.
Well, there's two ways to look at this, Ian. One is historically, should historic figures be played by actors that are not ethnically matched to the figure itself? And then there's fiction. And look at Armando Iannuccio's David Copperfield. That was great. David Copperfield was played by the young lad that was in Slumdog Millionaire and did a very, very good job. However, this is more nuanced than that, I think. And I don't think that historical figures should be cast within ethnic minorities that do not fit the ethnic mould of that character, of that real person. But if we move to today's TV, I mean, Peter had Roger Bolton on earlier, who was great, actually. He just spelled it out. And he used the example of Shetland, a BBC crime drama set in Shetland. I've got my own views on that because there's no trees in Shetland. The reason is...
There's also no crime.
No. The reason is the acting is so wooden. It's all been taken up by that. But anyway, I digress. And I don't think that we should be casting ethnic minorities just to tick boxes. I think that is against them. I mean, there are many, many great actors. There are. And there's the other school of thought that thinks it's their job, it's their craft. They can become the person, they can act out being the person. Well, we found this with Glenda Jackson when she did when she played Hamlet, for instance. You know,
yeah,
so
I mean, you can, and I know there's lots of people go, well, if Shakespeare was around, Shakespeare was a punk of his day. He would have loved the idea that people mixed it up and a woman played a bloke and a bloke played a woman and a fella with one arm.
Well, that's pantomime, isn't it? It's even now.
It's exactly that. It's in that territory. So, but I think it is nuanced in certain areas. You know, if in 30 years' time Netflix decide to make the Danny Dyer story and you open up your newspaper and discover the part of Danny Dyer is being played by Shamima Begum because she's got a new life now and she went to RADA when she came back, and you'd sit there and go, hang on a sec, no, that's really not going to work.
Yeah, and I think we can see through that, Ian, and I think that's why the poll of 4,000 people actually said, look, you need to let common sense prevail here. Don't let a real-life character from history be played by someone that's not ethnically matched. However, move on to drama, as long as it is proportional representative of that fact. I mean, there is no point in casting agents going through loads of castings for both male and female, young and old, and say, well, you wouldn't cast an octogenarian in The Sound of Music as one of the young children, for heaven's sake.
Well, indeed.
So that is my point. That's my point. So we really need to keep it. We need to keep it real, and we need to keep it as realistic as possible, by all means, as Emerald Fennell has done for what film is it she's just done? Wuthering Heights. Jacob Elordi, wonderful actor, with Margot Robbie, and she is much, much older than the younger than 20 years old that Catherine should have been. And it's often said that Heathcliff is a brown man. I mean, who cares, really? I think people are going to see this film and marvel at the wonderful novel that it is, hopefully. And but it's her directing, it's her putting life into the arts, and it's her command of it, and it's the way they act. That's what we should be judging.
And who plays Kate Bush? That's what I want to know. We didn't hear about that role.
Is she running up that hill?
And interesting, the very same people, usually in the sort of lovey, acty world, that go, there's nothing wrong with a black guy playing Henry VIII, are the same people that lose their mind if they think that a straight person's going to play a gay person. Because, oh no, it's got to be a gay person, or it's got to be a trans person, and all of this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of contradiction in there. Let's just move to this, Claire, because we've not got long on the clock, but this is, of course, Keir Starmer's amazing visit to China. He came back with a massive jamboree bag full of goodies. Hang on.
Visas.
No, visas. That's why you got to get some visas. Fantastic. Donald Trump has said that this deal, dealing with China, could be dangerous. Here's what the US president had to say.
Mr. President, what do you think about the UK getting into business with China? Keir Starmer was in Beijing.
Well, it's very dangerous for them to do that, and it's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China.
Well, there it is. That's the view of the president. It should be said, of course, Claire, that America deal with China as well. It's not like there's no deals going on. I mean, so I'm not quite sure what the point was. I mean, the total trade deal of US imports from China is about $462 billion. So that's quite significant. That said, still not quite sure why Starmer was hot-footing it down Beijing way.
Well, I think he was running away from his pending leadership qualifications here and trying to get, keep himself strong. And don't forget, he was supposed to take Rachel with him. But I don't think we can say hand on heart that Trump, we knew he was going to say something, because he loves saying China. So he has to do that, and he has to talk about that, as well as Canada. And that was interesting that he brought Canada into it as well, because Mark Carney is having quite a ride with him at the moment. And so, of course, Trump had to come out and say something. I don't even know if that was in the red carpet of Melania's documentary.
Can't wait to see that.
Can't wait to see that. 20 days.
Really looking forward to seeing
election.
That. Might do it this weekend.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Claire, on that point, thank you very much. We'll look forward to the Claire Muldoon story. Claire will be played by Frank Bruno. Looking forward to that. Claire, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Over to you. Load of subjects there. Trade, BBC, diversity. But the salient subject we began with, or the topic, was the rise. And this is a crunching gear change from the pace we might normally run at this point in the programme. What is behind the rise in child killers? This is after the story of the 15-year-old who yesterday was found guilty of murdering a 12-year-old on the way home from school, a child who enjoyed hurting people with a history of violence. He liked what he did. What's behind that? 0344 499 1000. Just gone 1:30. This is Talk.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
On that question, what is behind the rise in child killers? We are really reflecting on the brutal murder of Leo Ross. This happened almost a year ago, to the 21st of January last year. He was stabbed fatally in the stomach on his way home from school. A 15-year-old yesterday pleaded guilty to this. I think it was 14 when the attack was carried out, and he had a history of violent assaults, and some of those had been carried out in the days and indeed on the day that he went on to kill Leo. So what is going on in this respect? In a moment, we'll speak to Raj Persaud, the consultant psychiatrist. First, James Treadwell, Professor of Criminology, University of Staffordshire. Afternoon to you, James. Look, I know crime statistics are always a little bit tricky. Has something gone up? Has something gone down? They're often politicised as well, so it's quite tricky to get to the truth of it. From what I can gather, whilst murder itself has kind of levelled and in some cases gone down, it appears to be some evidence to suggest that of murder convictions, the under 16 group of perpetrators has actually increased in the last 10 years. What's happening?
Yeah, absolutely right, Ian. I think first off, there's a great irony. I was talking about this yesterday, in that on one hand, we're being told that murder is its lowest ever level, and the things are far, far better. And that is true if we look at the recorded homicide statistics overall. On the same day as we're getting the terrible case of the murder of Leo Ross. And I think, for me, first off, number one, claiming any success in our current levels of murder, which is when we think it's now around about the same as it was in the 1960s, when actually we think about all of the kind of advances that we've had as a society. Yeah. It doesn't seem that we've advanced all that far, actually. True. I think the murder rate would be far higher too, had it not been for huge advances in trauma care, medical care, etc. So, what's going on is not a positive story in many ways, but the really damaging thing for me in that is if we start to then look at some of the examples of where this horrible form of violence is starting to kind of manifest, particularly amongst young people, that is really, really concerning, which is where the fall in figures overall is shouldn't lead us to think everything is good and rosy. Particularly, just some examples to remember, it's not only things like the murder of Leo Ross, where it would seem that the motivation is very much hurting other people. We've seen that motivation, for example, in things like the Southport attacks, just a pure nasty. The murder of Brianna Jai, just a horrendous kind of desire to inflict pain and suffering. And I think we need to start to think about, where is it? What kind of dark corners is it that young people are going into, and what is it that's absent in their lives if they're kind of producing that sort of attachment to sadistic violence?
And I was about to say on that point, I mean, the short answer is always, well, look at the family upbringing, terrible home, no guidance from day one, hardly any school, never taught the difference between right and wrong, encouraged to swear, be disrespectful. I mean, the miserable list goes on, of course. But I do wonder whether it's something much more than that, because coming from a dysfunctional home, coming from a chaotic house that may be awful and horrific for a child, clearly doesn't mean you automatically go on to be a horrendous killer.
No, and it is absolutely that. And actually, if we look at the examples of some of those that I've given, so take, for example, the perpetrators in the case of Brianna Jai, that's certainly, that horrendous upbringing doesn't necessarily seem to be there.
Correct.
It would seem, in fact, I think that some of the kind of forums, some of the material, some of the violent engagement through the sort of dark forums of the internet, watching sort of ISIS execution videos as a form of entertainment and being attracted to very, very hyper-violent media, for some individuals is very, very harmful. Far more people engage with that material than go on to do horrendous things. But for a subset of those who engage with it, it's clearly very, very harmful, very damaging. And yes, you know, a lot of the time there are bad backgrounds, there's harmful upbringing, but, you know, there are far, far more people who've had terrible, horrendous experiences who go on to be police officers, prison officers, social workers. You know,
true.
There is no destiny to it. So I think it's very, very complex. You know, what I think certainly is there and is positive in the fall of in the homicide statistics is one of the reasons that overall homicide statistics are falling, I think, is that some of the access to the most horrendous forms of weapon has now been limited. You know, the sort of serrated bladed hunting knives, the zombie knife style machetes are being used less, and that's giving kind of people less capacity to inflict really, you know, the sort of horrendous injuries that even trauma surgeons can't manage.
James, on that point, thank you for speaking with us again. Great to see you too. James Treadwell, Professor of Criminology, University of Staffordshire. Let's talk to Raj Persaud, Consultant Psychiatrist. Raj, good afternoon to you. It's interesting, isn't it, our view of children doing bad things, particularly when it comes to something as final and fatal as murder. We always begin, it seems, our journey of judging children from the obvious point of view. Look, they're kids. Kids do sometimes do naughty things. We have a sympathy. They might be a little bit naughty in the playground. They might throw some things, break a window, but they're not really bad kids. And then some of them do the most horrendous thing, and our view completely changes. Our view goes from the writing them off as, well, some kids are just a bit naughty, to pure evil. Is it fair to define child killers just as pure evil?
Well, let's talk technically about the definition. The definition of evil from a psychiatric, scientific standpoint is psychopath, someone who has no remorse and who inflicts pain or suffering on others because it advances their own ends. They put themselves first. But the key point here about this particular horrendous case, what makes this particularly horrible, is a different dimension, which is, as you say, this person seemed to enjoy the killing. So the word technically we use in psychiatry is sadism. Sadism was where you enjoy the suffering, and there are many elements in this case where this person seemed to actually enjoy inflicting suffering. So I think the really worrying thing is possibly the rise in sadism, which is a less commonly used word. But the psychiatric research is very interesting on this, because one of the places you see a lot of sadists is in internet trolling. So when you see people on X or on social media seeming to attack others and joining like a witch hunt, the evidence from psychiatric research done on those people is the thing they score highest on is sadism. They enjoy giving people a damn good kicking on the internet, and is at the thin edge of the wedge. We think about violent video games, and we think about violence on TV and film, and we think that our young people are being exposed to that as the crucial variable. But I wonder if what the real thing is, given the possible rise in sadism, is that they are exposed to trolling, and they begin to learn to enjoy inflicting suffering on others via the internet. In the old days, you spotted a sadist as a child because they enjoyed torturing animals. They enjoyed the magnifying glass sun on the ants type thing, right? They enjoyed, and that was a big clue that this person was going to grow up into someone very dangerous.
And in terms of the background of these kids, I mean, is there, in your experience, Raj, a commonality in those backgrounds? As I was saying to James, our previous guest, I mean, it's a very seductive route to go down. You come from a terrible home. You've had no parameters of normality or decency or respect. What a surprise you end up like this. That's too easy, right?
Well, yes, I agree, because obviously a lot of people have had a tough background and upbringing, and they don't turn into murderers and sadists in this sense. But I do think there's another issue about power. We're raising a bunch of young people exposed to sadism on the internet who are very bleak and hopeless about their future and unemployment. We've got 700,000 graduates who are unemployed, apparently. So if you think about anger and violence as an attempt to reestablish a sense of power, when people feel powerless, maybe that's another thing that's going on here in the background, I think.
In terms of the environment, nature versus nurture kind of argument, I wonder, you mentioned, kids, and James, our previous guest, mentioned, the emergence of the kind of videos that kids can watch. I was talking to a social worker recently who said that she's had more than one experience of going to the police station with a child who's been accused of a knife crime, for example. And the one thing she seems to have spotted is that the kid themselves can't seem to really see the seriousness of what they've done. It doesn't seem to be what was once the most horrific crime, and in some of these cases they might be fatal, other times they might be, you know, attempted murder or whatever it turns out to be, but they don't digest the seriousness of it. It's no biggie, as it were.
Yeah, I agree, and that's also very dangerous. I think that you raised a point about parenting, and parenting is one of the most difficult jobs in the world, and you need a license to get a dog, but anyone can be a parent, and that's part of the reasons why psychiatrists have jobs, in a sense, because most people are terrible at it. But some people are particularly bad at it, and maybe what's happening in the modern era is, in fact, the person that's parenting your children is not you anymore, but it's the internet. You see so many parents hand very young children an iPad or a phone or something as a way of parenting them or distracting them, because parents haven't got the time to do parenting. So it's one of the issues that parenting's been transferred to the internet, and that's very dangerous indeed. Yeah. And maybe that's why we're seeing what we're seeing.
Is there a point when you go to a psychiatrist get-together? I know that I'm sure there are heady-doos where you guys meet up and exchange stories. Is there what's the word on the psychiatric street? Is there going to be a point round the corner somewhere? Maybe AI will play its part. We know it certainly will play a part in certain changes, perhaps, to the human condition in different ways. But are we going to live in a world at some point where we don't see any of this because we've managed to address disorders, psychiatric disorders and others, so sufficiently and effectively that no one's bad anymore?
Yes, there is that. I mean, no one's evil anymore. They've got some kind of personality disorder. No one's unhappy anymore. Whatever happened to unhappiness? Instead, everyone's got clinical depression instead. And so what we're seeing is the disappearance of the idea that life might be stressful and that might be part of life to endure the vicissitudes and the normal stress of life. And instead, what we're seeing is the rise of diagnosis. Now, compared to you and me in our generation, the younger generation seem to like psychiatric diagnosis. They seem to want one, be it ADHD or autism. And one of the great concerns is the notion of diagnosis as an escape from life's difficulties. If you have a diagnosis of ADHD or autism, you get extra time in exams, etc., etc., etc. So the rise in diagnosis, the word on the street amongst psychiatrists, we can't understand how come practically everyone, particularly young people, want a diagnosis, whereas our generation fought shy. And maybe there's a balance somewhere in the middle. Maybe we were too afraid of diagnosis, and maybe they're too attracted to it. But one of the issues is this desire for everyone to have a diagnosis. To what extent is that an escape from learning to deal with how tough life can be as part of life?
And on that point, Raj, great to have you on with us as ever. Thank you. Dr. Raj Persaud, consultant psychiatrist, on the complex, tricky, still unfathomable issue of, I guess, why we go bad in so many ways, but with a particular reference to the question we asked at the beginning about what's behind the rise in child killers. What is going on there? 0344 499 1000. Simon's in Northamptonshire. On this very point, Simon, what are you thinking? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Ian. I hope you're well.
Yeah, good.
My thoughts on it, I don't think it's one thing that you can blame it all on, but I think the rise of social media is one of the factors where, say you need to flip 4 switches in a kid's brain to turn them evil, where they're going to kill someone. Social media is definitely one of those things that will flip 1 or 2 of them. The way I perceive it as, and I'm sure you'll remember this as well, back in, I'll say our day, when you didn't have phones, if you were going to have a barney with someone, it was face-to-face, you shouted at someone, they punched you, it was a direct consequence that would stop things from escalating. Whereas with cyberbullying and all these things, kids do it over the internet, and they can do it for days, weeks, with no consequence. So when things do escalate, it becomes very violent very quickly. And then also within that sphere, you've got the instant gratification. They like to post this because they get attention. So you've got that double meaning of, I don't see any consequence of this. And also, this gets me likes from other people. This is good. doesn't make the child evil, but if you've got all of those things, the catalyst is in place there, and you flip these switches off, it's just a recipe for disaster.
You're absolutely right. And, you know, I keep watching, we did one the other day, these debates about kids and smartphones in school and should they have them. And it's kind of like a lot of it misses the point of where the real damage is, because you can turn off X or Facebook and say you can't watch it. But, I mean, there's a myriad other ways that you can get to bad stuff. WhatsApp is a particularly murky place for kids to be dwelling, because all of those groups that can gang up, and you're not in the group this week, you've been kicked out of the group, and the list goes on. To me, it's a mystery that anyone has a different opinion to the one you've just offered, Simon. I think what you've just said is absolutely logical. Anyone can see it. There'll be a point in our time where we'll say, not just social media, but kind of the internet is like smoking 40 cigarettes a day, in terms of the damage it potentially does to kids.
Yeah, I mean, and I think what it is, we don't say we turn it off like they're saying social media bans, but you just regulate the same way you would not send your child at 10 or 11 years old into a nightclub, into, say, an Ann Summers, a sex shop, and expose them to all of this.
Correct.
But some bad parenting, they will give a tablet to a child going, you're doing exactly the same thing, and you're wondering why they're having warped views on things, because they're not getting things controlled and released them as you would as adults.
Yeah, all of those areas, subject matter, pornography, whatever, violence, you know, that certificate 18 thing is gone. You know, social media doesn't really do that. It allows kids to take part on what are essentially, you know, the Facebooks and the X's of this world. I know not every kid, 13-year-olds aren't usually on Facebook, but the equivalences of Snap, whatever else it happens to be, Insta. You know, the list goes on. These are really adult places, not for kids. And the build-up of potential gyp is exactly as you've just described. It's there for all to see. Simon, I've got to move, but you've been great. Thank you very much for starting us off on this. 0344 499 1000. Violent and killer kids. What is behind the rise in that? And there has been a rise. But why? 0344 499 1000.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This one in from Barbara says, I put a great deal of this violence carried out by young kids can be attributed to the incredibly violent video games. 15 years ago, a young cousin who was not then even 10 had a game that horrified my brother and myself. The butchery of this game was horrifying. Naked women running through the streets, masked gunmen picking them off, saying things like, "That's another BITCH gone." We told his mother, our cousin, who just shrugged. Luckily, he turned out to be a wonderful adult. Yeah, and that is usually the case, we're told. But you do think... I read a story of a woman who felt she had 2 kids. One was absolutely engrossed in stuff like that and the other one wasn't, and they both turned out to be okay, but the one that was engrossed in that kind of stuff, she said she lost him for those 4 or 5 years. He just wasn't the key. He wasn't climbing trees, he wasn't doing Lego, he wasn't anything really other than this kind of face that just was perpetually glued to a screen. So yes, turned out all right, but you don't know, do you? There's got to be better ways of passing your time than shooting up scantily clad women running naked in the streets. This is Matthew in Newport. What have you got, Matthew? Afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. I just thought it interesting when we call these children evil. Obviously, they're not nice. And it was a terrible, terrible thing that happened to Jamie Bolger. Understatement again. But it was a reaction between the two different countries. A year later, in Norway, there was a case of a girl's name I can't pronounce very well. Her last 2 names were Marie Rendegard, and it's a very similar killing. I don't want to go into the details of that because it was horrific again, but 3 boys were charged or found to be identified responsible for her death. And in Norway, because they can't actually
2 boys it was, yeah.
Yeah, well, they were saying, they say 3 in some cases and 2 in the other. Okay. But essentially, rather than being, this is actually not my words, rather than being demonised, the boys were immediately placed with child welfare authorities, psychiatrists and social workers, and I think they had to do that until they were 18. And they were fundamentally returned to the families and reintegrated into community. The press dropped the story after a couple of days, because they can't be criminally punished if they're, the age of responsibility is 15 in Norway. There's no trial, no prison sentence, and no public naming. Now, the actual thing that went on from this was later on there was an investigation into it when people brought up whether or not they did or didn't do it. But they actually mentioned then that the Norwegian sort of, one of the ministers wanted some Ninja Turtles videos banned because they were encouraging violence to children, going back to the last point of someone made that, you know, could be influenced. But I think it's interesting, and we're right to be outraged and ultimately disgusted by these acts. But the way that we seem to, in our country, handle it, and I know everyone goes on at Norway this, Norway and Sweden with this, but I don't think our criminal justice system does anyone any favours for rehabilitation, especially the young. I mean, the Bolger kids have turned out, I'm not saying they wouldn't have, but they don't seem to turn out good sort of people of the community. I mean, one of them's in and out of prison, isn't he, for other things. So I just thought it was a point to make that, you know, are they inherently evil? Can they be rehabilitated?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? I guess within this, you know, without getting too deep down it, and I'm no qualified psychiatrist, but it kind of tests us all in a way, doesn't it, in terms of the human gene pool, what we're part of. Evil versus, you know, bad environment, whether it's video games, whether it's the Ninja Turtles, whether it's something else. And nobody really knows. You know, the top psychiatrists don't know, because you have kids who grew up in perfectly normal families. I think there are fewer of them, who went on to do horrible things. And then, you know, you have kids who grew up in the most horrific circumstances who went on to be fine pillars of society. So it's tempting to say there's a type, but there isn't fully a type.
No, I don't think there is. And I think as well, you know, obviously these are specific cases of almost psychopathy or whatever, you know, being, I can't even say the word now, but someone who, you know, was a psychopath. But, you know, I'm not to sort of belittle this. When I was younger, we had a fight amongst sort of kids in the playground, and somebody put a brick in the lunchbox, or half a brick, and smacked me around the head with it. I mean, that could have been something that just went another direction, you know, from what was sliding door sort of things. And that person, I know him now, he didn't grow up to be anything other than a fundamentally sound chap. But I just think that we do we do demonise these people instantly, and maybe, you know, I'm out of my league as well. I'm no psychiatrist. But
no, I know, but you don't want to. I constantly have that battle of what's the point when we lose sympathy for a child that goes wrong? Because there is a point when you think, well, it's clearly not the kid's fault because they're 3 and they're doing terrible things. They've not been given the right guidance, and then they're 4 and we still have that understanding, and then they're 5 and we still sympathise with the kid. But then something really bad happens when they're, I don't know, 11. Now, nothing's changed about the circumstances when we did sympathise with them, but what has changed is the thing they've done. So we then change and go, no, they're not victim of their circumstance, they're just evil. Is that too easy?
No, it's not, but I mean, you see children change, don't you? Some kids are, and they say, oh, that's terrible, this, but they're nasty little so-and-so sometimes.
Yeah.
But that probably is a product, unless you're talking about a neurological disorder within them that we don't know about. It is probably a product. It is very complex, but I wanted to just try and put across that other countries handle it differently, and I think this immediate outrage it's got to be tempered, and I'm sure it is by the people involved in the system. But I think sometimes the law comes in and says, you know, you're at the age to be punished, and we will punish you. And there's no way around it because the law doesn't allow for anything else. But maybe it's all too deep anyway. I just thought.
And I wonder whether if we discuss this in 30 years' time, Matthew, we'll be saying exactly the same thing. We just don't know. There is no kind of rational explanation for the most horrific and irrational acts. Matthew, thank you by definition. That was Matthew in Newport. More from you on the way. 03444 499 1000. Jeremy says doubling of teenage killing since 2012. Smartphone ownership began in 2012. Something to ponder on that one as well. You can message us 87222 as well. Voice notes in there too. Lots to get through. Right now, let's get the news headlines at 2 o'clock. You're listening to Talk.
The UK on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk across the UK.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome back. It is the home of Common Sense. We're responding to... it's not a comfortable question, by the way, to ask what is behind the rise in child killers. But we do know yesterday we saw yet another example of this horrific thing coming to fruition in Birmingham at the Crown Court there after the teenage killer who murdered a 12-year-old boy was was found guilty, having been pleaded guilty as well to the crime. Now, the boy, of course, can't be named for legal reasons, but the police did say one of the traits in this particular child was that he enjoyed hurting people. There was a form and certainly a set of events preceding this murder that marked this kid out as an absolute wrong 'un. But what's behind that? What's behind the rise in child killers? Details to come on that. Also this afternoon, the BBC has been urged to stop box-ticking casting that shoehorns ethnic minority actors into things like period dramas. This is a damning review that has just said, look, use your brain, mate. Henry VIII is a white bloke, a fat white bloke at that. The report also warns the corporation must do more to represent the working classes and women over 60. Really? Thoughts on that too? And councillors have revolted after Labour cancelled those local elections for 4.6 million people. This has sparked claims of democratic outrage. Norfolk County Council has been hit by resignations in protest, while the leader of Welwyn Hatfield Council has stepped down. If councillors decide to step down en masse, Labour could have an absolutely massive issue on their hands. We'll have more on that as well. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk 0344 499 1000. Let's go into this story then. The BBC box-ticking debacle. I mean, it's a bit of a nonsense, frankly. They've been accused of ticking the box because they want to get more people of different colours and backgrounds, sometimes genders, into big roles in period dramas. And if that means casting a black person or a female as Henry VIII, so be it. Just get with the script, kids. It's what actors do. Apparently. The Independent Review says the corporation risks losing audiences unless it does more to represent properly other areas, as I mentioned, working classes and women over 60. It's very funny to listen to middle-class arty people define what they think a working-class person is. Oh, my God, it's hilarious. I've been there many times. Let's speak to Reem Ibrahim, who's with us, political commentator. Reem, good afternoon to you.
Hi, good afternoon, Ian.
It's interesting, isn't it? You know, I'm a white bloke, you're a brown woman. We have, you know, quite a lot in common. We both function and breathe, but we are slightly different. I think it'd be a bit weird if I played you in a movie, not least the age gap, but also a bit weird if you played me in one. So we just have to use our common sense, surely.
Well, Ian, I'd be flattered if you could play me in a film.
I'll give it a go.
Well, I think you'd be very, very good. I think you know all about my perspectives and you really, truly understand what it means to live.
Really get into that character, couldn't I?
Exactly. Well, look, this is a really interesting report. It's an independent report, and it was effectively looking at why the BBC struggled with audience retention. And they were saying that actually some of the aspects of this has been the really odd sort of interpretations of how people should be casted for those roles. So one example that was looked at was the Charles Dickens's Great Expectations, and the fact that they had a mixed race actress playing a Stella. You know, these are historical figures that are being represented by people that were not them. Now, the thing is, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with, you know, new interpretation. That is how art looks like. You know, art is about interpretation. You can cast different people for different things. But there are certain aspects of this, certain historical figures that are completely being misrepresented. And one example that I recently came across, which is not from the BBC, but I think it really kind of comes into it, is Netflix's Bridgerton. I absolutely love Bridgerton. I think it's such a fantastic show. But what they have done is they've taken a character who struggled with infertility in the books, and they've made her a lesbian. Now, of course, if you're a lesbian, you cannot have a child with another woman. That's how biology works. And they've completely... You know, the book, when they discuss the impact of her struggling with fertility, she was married to a man, and it was really, really quite emotionally damaging. And it's a really lovely storyline about the struggle of infertility and what that looks like. And then they took that and made her a lesbian. I mean, this is just outrageous.
So how are they kind of corroborating that? You know, bearing it's a period drama, right? So it's how were they? So there wasn't such a thing as going to a clinic or a surrogate or anything like that in this story. How did they?
No.
How did they stand that up?
Well, they didn't. I mean, they basically completely ignored what I think is one of the most important parts of that character's storyline.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing, Ian, is when we're looking at the model of the BBC is taxpayer funded. We are forced to pay for it. Now, for every single other channel that is privately run, that has to make a profit, and if it doesn't make a profit or it isn't funded by some sort of wealthy person, which is usually the case in the media nowadays, then that channel fails.
Yeah.
The channel is no longer then broadcasted on terrestrial television. The problem is with the BBC, there is no market mechanisms. You know, the number of people watching the BBC doesn't actually really matter. It's all taxpayer funded. And that is why this is so pernicious. This is why I think this is an enormous problem, because people talk about representation all the time. But I tell you what, I don't care if the BBC want to cast XYZ historical character as black or white or mixed race when they clearly historically weren't. I wouldn't care if it wasn't taxpayer funded.
Yeah.
The fact that we are forced to pay for the BBC through the license fee, which is a tax, we cannot watch any other channel unless we pay for the BBC license fee. That is the real problem here. We've got this obsession with diversity and inclusion, ensuring that people that are clearly not existing in history, that then being represented, and it's a complete misnomer in that respect. But I wouldn't care, and many people wouldn't care, if we weren't forced to pay for it.
Indeed. And I thought it was interesting, and this is always fascinating to me, about the underrepresentation of working classes. And I remember years ago now watching, I haven't seen EastEnders for a long time, but I remember watching an episode. Phil Mitchell, you know, good old shaven-headed Phil, we all know one of the Mitchell brothers, is preparing dinner for him and his lad, OK? So, I don't know, he's a single dad, I think, at this point. So Phil's dinner table looked like this. There was a carved baguette, there was couscous and aubergine, I think there was even a candle, and a nice bottle of Chateau Neuf du Pape, or whatever it was.
Lovely.
I mean, this was the least working class table you've ever seen. I'm not kidding you, it was rubbish. And clearly, no one on the set of EastEnders thought, yeah, I don't think that would happen in Phil Mitchell's character. If Phil Mitchell had pasta, it would be in a tin. It would be called spaghetti. So that's the difference. So they're not very good at working classes. But I think it's not an immutable characteristic in that sense, right?
I do think that the entire concept of what it means to be working class is just completely for the birds, because it's interesting. I was on a mainstream media channel that I will not name. It wasn't the BBC, and they were asking, you know, would you call yourself working class? And I was like, well, most people think I don't sound working class. I was brought up in West London, but I went to a state school, and you know, actually, my mum would say she's working class, and she grew up in a council house, and you know, what does it even mean? I don't seem working class.
Yeah,
I don't,
you can't.
You know, what does it even mean?
There was a great piece by Julie Bindel, I think it was, this morning on this very point. She said, I was, had a very, very working class background, but now I live in Crouch End. I'm surrounded by Pilates classes and nice restaurants selling the aforementioned couscous by the bucket. She said, I'm not working class now. So that kind of thing can change. Whereas if you're, the colour of your skin or your gender doesn't tend to change, I know the latter is obviously a little bit contentious these days, but it is interesting. I think common sense is the point here, though, isn't it? I mean, you can sometimes, Shakespeare would have probably enjoyed people playing around with his characters a bit. I understand that. A man's a woman, a woman's a man, the whole pantomime thing. But generally speaking, when you're going out your way to cast a black female as Henry VIII or whatever the heck it is, then that's not using creative license, that's just being a nutter.
Yeah, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Ian. It is about having that creative license and ensuring that what you're doing is you're interpreting it good. And this is the point. If this was a privatized BBC, and I really do believe that we should privatize the BBC. If we had where we have actual choice, the BBC's success depended on whether or not it retained viewers, then lots of people would turn on the channel and see, a black woman representing Henry VIII and be like, actually, maybe this isn't really for me. And that's what would happen. The problem is we don't see that. And you're totally right about Shakespeare, by the way. My favorite Shakespearean play is Twelfth Night. And one of the one of the key themes of Twelfth Night is cross-dressing. It's a woman who is pretending to be a man. And that's what makes it a comedy. It's supposed to be hilarious that women dress as men. It's not necessarily seen as funny as it is now, but back then it was hilarious, and I still find it hilarious. Yeah. But the joke is, back then, women were not allowed to be actresses. So the joke is, it's a man acting as a woman dressed as a man. That's the joke. That's the entire point of the joke. So Shakespearean plays were all about, playing with it. It was creative licensing, but also the real kind of holding up a mirror to society. That is the beauty of art. Yeah. And I've had this opinion for a very long time, Ian. I think what we need, and one of the biggest things that I would say the so-called right struggle with, right-wing politics struggles with, is that none of us go into the arts. Culture is dominated by left-wing, guardian-eating, tofu-eating socialists. Those are the only people that go into the arts. We need more right-wing poets and writers and authors and commentators and actors. We need more people that believe in conservative, perhaps free market, individual liberty, those principles going into not just politics or policy or business and making money, go into the arts.
Yeah, I like that. You're right. It is crammed full of sizzling lefties in that curious profession. Listen, Reem, great to have you on. Are you jumping on an aeroplane fairly soon, as I understand
I am. Exclusive reveal on talkTV. I am moving to Washington, D.C. tomorrow.
What about that? I did know this, you had told us, but it's interesting that it's crept up on us quite quickly. So tomorrow, you're off to DC. It's a beautiful city. It absolutely lives and breathes politics. The roads, the tarmac, smell of politics and news. It's a great place to be, and I'm sure we're going to catch up when you're over there as well.
Absolutely.
We'll speak to you on the hill, as they say.
See you soon, Ian.
Reem, great. Good luck with it all. Thanks for being with us, Reem Ibrahim, political commentator with us on the basics of diversity tick boxes. It's kind of fascinating. The working class thing is always good. Once in a while, you're watching something that's quite good, and there is an actor playing a kind of working class role, and they just fluff it on the last line. They'll be on a roll. There'll be a lovely bit of script where they're talking about, their upbringing and, I grew up with my auntie, I had no chance of nothing. It was terrible. We could hardly bloody eat, and, we never had a moment to go to the cinema. It's like, you've just lost your accent, mate. You can't do that at the end. Should that role go to a working class? But I don't think you can. Most actors can turn that thing on. They're able to do the posh and everything else in between, which is great. But of course, you would never these days get. Certainly today with AI voice agencies and stuff, if you wanted a Geordie voiceover, you wouldn't get a bloke from Leicester and go, can you do a Geordie accent? And he goes, yeah, even if his Geordie accent's like bang on, you just kind of wouldn't, you just book the Geordie actor, right? That makes sense, because you're definitely going to get authentic if you do that. But the working class thing is a little more nuanced, but I do think constantly I see films and soap operas just misrepresent what it is to be working class and it's movable. I know it's not always the same, and there is such a thing called underclass, and that gets into a whole different territory. And I really think some of these kind of, arty-farty types who work in drama think that working class and underclass are kind of the same thing. That, the working class is, they all live in like rough houses, and no one goes to work, and there's probably got a drink problem. No, that's not working class. That's something else. It might be, but only in the same way as it might be in the middle classes. And we know, the middle class, you could stereotype them, a bunch of coke-sniffing dodgepots. You could do that. So, you can get it wrong spectacularly, but does it matter in the same way when you're messing around with class as messing around with other characteristics which are immutable, like one's skin colour, for example. Matt is in Cheshire. Matt, how you doing?
All right, Trill. How's it going? You
It's
all
all right, bruv. Yeah, what's happening?
All right, my son.
You got the job, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you. That's one of many as well. I'm not going to do any more on air because I need to warm up usually.
Yeah.
On everything you've just said, it's like a remnants from George Floyd, and it's always black people that are crowbarred in, not shoehorned. It's never Asian people, very rarely Asian people.
Yeah.
And also, you would never get reverse of this, like me playing Steve Biko or Malcolm X.
You'd make a great Biko.
You also never get things like that are specifically black, like a documentary about West Indian history with a white person in it.
Yeah.
But you'll get something that's obviously white, like, I don't know, maypole dancing that will have an assistant black presenter. So it's just literally all over the place. Trump got rid of this on his first day in office. He said DEI is dead. And the BBC are so archaic and sort of wedded to it, like Labour. They just can't bring themselves to say, this is truly pathetic.
But they also, it's also worth noting though, Matt, and I've said this so many times on this programme as well, that when the BBC first pitched up in White City in West London, and White City, for those who don't know, is surrounded by like big council estates. You know, did people think of it sounds like this sort of almost middle class area? Things have changed over there, but you know, it's surrounded by council estates. And the BBC, I'm told, back in the day, probably the 50s, whenever they built that thing, you know, that big horseshoe building, Matt. You know, the one they used to show on Blue Peter every now and again, or Roy Castle tap dancing outside. That thing. And one of the thinking behind it was that they could get a lot of the locals, you know, local kids could get jobs there, and it never ever happened. And then years later, when Greg Dyke, who was running it, said, oh, the BBC is hideously white, they thought, oh, we better get some black kids working here. But they didn't get black kids from the estate. They just got posh black kids who never thought they were going to struggle to get a job in the media. It was almost like they'd gone down the wrong route. They just thought... And I remember being there talking to so many people at the BBC, and one guy literally came out with a sentence. He said, basically, I am working class. And I said, oh, right, what did your parents do? And he said his mother was a dentist and his dad was a doctor. And he was like breathing through his teeth going, yeah, very basic background. And I thought, OK, that's fantastic that your mum was a dentist and your dad was a doctor, or whatever way round it was. But you're not working class, mate. But the BBC employed this guy thinking, yeah, he's working class. But because he's black? I mean, how offensive is that, apart from anything else? But you can see the kind of middle-class intelligentsia at the BBC saying, oh, we've got to get, if we can get one of those, you know, we want somebody with like one of those Nigerian names that ends in E and people forget to pronounce it correctly. We want one of those kids working here. And that ticks a box. But they're not ticking a box. So they do fail. And this is more about crew than it is actors. They don't really know what they're doing, Matt. It's not just the BBC, in fairness.
No, I mean, they would never have somebody with like my accent on there. They'll have someone with like a diluted Mancunian accent. I used to listen to Andy Kershaw when I was young on the radio.
Yeah.
And you thought they were getting somewhere with like regional representation of accents.
Yeah, well, you had Andy and you had his sister as well, didn't you? They were both at it.
Yeah,
so,
Liz Kershaw.
Yeah, so that you had good representation in that respect, and that kind of changed a bit as well, didn't it?
But now we're back to sort of all the actors, like Cumberbatch started on the BBC, the night manager, Tom Hiddleston, he's posh, middle class. And like you say, all the people in the background are all just happy to be there, hanging around the other upper middle class people. It's an embarrassment. We never mention, Ian, just before I go, talent and ability. And that's the main loss in all this. Talent and ability. People are just there for the sake of it.
Good point. Love it, Matt. Thank you very much indeed for that. You take care, my son. That's Matt in Cheshire, 0344 499 1000. Calls and comments on that. We've got a lot of tricky subjects we're up and running with as well. More from you in that area as well. Lots of messages coming through. 20 past 2. This is Talk.
Did say, no, the rights of the asylum seekers are above the rights of the British people.
Shabana Mahmood is going onto these media channels and saying that she's been, engaging with communities, engaging with police. She's engaged with no one.
The latest is that Brooklyn could be set to sign a 7-figure book deal, and it's the same publisher as Prince Harry's Spare. That makes me shudder.
And Mel B wasn't there. Scary wasn't there, so I'm going to step in. I'm here. I'm ready for it. Nigel, I'm sorry. I'm joining the Spice Girls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, 0344 499 1000. Brad in Cambridge says, why does it never work the other way round? If this is all about acting skills and new perspectives, why do I never see a white person playing a traditional or historic black role, says Brad. I think it's the same argument. And if this was like 20, 30 years ago, I might have been more sympathetic to it. That suggests, because we know that black faces on TV have, certainly in many surveys, been massively overrepresented because TV companies have been... Didn't EastEnders once have to apologise for having like a couple of episodes with no white people in it? Because someone thought, oh, it'd be a really good idea, right, just to showcase what it's really like. And of course, everyone went, this is stupid, this is really silly. Because of the reasons behind it, etc. I think the original idea behind it was that there was no black faces on TV when there should have been. And so clearly you needed to even it up and be a bit more realistic. So I understand that. Or, you know, I remember a mate of mine who was, I haven't seen him for a while, an actor called Deepak Verma. And Deepak played Sanjay in EastEnders. And some of you will remember Sanjay. He was, I think, the first Asian character in a soap opera. And he was always talking about the fact that firstly they went into stereotypes. So if you were the Asian character, you had to be a bit wacky. You couldn't just be the Asian character. You had to be a bit like, you'd have to do something, be an Elvis impersonator or something. So there was a bit of that. But, you know, he regularly talked about the lack of roles where he can just be an Asian bloke without any massive reference to his religion or his heritage or his culture, etc. So he was there at the beginning. Now, if you were making EastEnders, whenever it started, in the 80s, I think it was, you would put people of different colours and backgrounds into the episodes. So I get why you need representation, because that's just accuracy. And if you didn't have it, that would be silly too, because people would watch it and go, look, I'm just watching East London on this soap, and there's no... Everyone's white. Isn't that a bit weird? So you'd find that weird too. But then they decided, I know what we'll do. We'll go the other way and just make it ridiculous. And I think that's what seems to have happened. On this point, Michael's in Birmingham. What's going on, Michael? Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi, Ian. Yeah, the point's been made a couple of times, but what I find so offensive about it is it's so one-way streetist, and it's not just with TV representation. It's the whole DEI thing. You know, people have made the point that Nelson Mandela or Martin Luther King would never be played by a white actor, and they'd be held to pay. But that goes into like DEI training in workplace, all of that. It's all about how wicked you are, and no one ever stops to ask a white person, have you been on the wrong end of racism? Have you ever been assaulted racially? Have you ever been discriminated against racially? And that's kind of like the offence I find with it. It's like totemic of something, and they will. You know, look, Sarah Poachin got vilified, and what she said, the way she said it wasn't great, but the point was made. You can go on chains of TV programmes, and certainly chains of TV ads, and you're not seeing a white bloke. You're just not. And this must be thought through. And they seem to double down on it. So
yeah, they do kind of double down, and it is a bit weird. I mean, you know, half of me doesn't give a toss. Like, I don't care who wants to sell me a Ford Fiesta or Persil washing powder, whether they're black, white, trans, or whatever. Just, you know, it's an advert. I'll take notice of it if I like it or won't. Having said that, if you're forced to sort of create a reasonable argument about diversity, then I think you would have to conclude that there is clear overrepresentation, often with the kind of, there's often the mixed race family, isn't there? That seems to be a popular one, where you've got a black dad and a white mum and obviously mixed race kids. Now, like, you know, on one level I don't care. On another level I'm thinking it's kind of weird that every ad has that, or every other ad seems to have that representation. So it seems there's a debate there, let's put it that way, kindly.
Yeah, but I mean, what I don't like about it is the way that it's shrugged off, or it's racism, or you're noticing something you shouldn't notice. But when people were saying about the underrepresentation, that wasn't put down to racism or you noticing what you shouldn't notice. But the final point I'll make is when these middle class lovies at the BBC and like try and present working class people. And I'm not going to go down the 4 Yorkshireman route. You know, you were lucky, and my family came from X, Y, and Z, and you know we lived in a
shoebox,
tarpaulin in an alley. But what's so funny is the way that when they try and do working class people, they normally make them northern, by the way, who always say things like like and see at the end of every sentence. And even to this very day, and my brother points it out because it's his name, the kind of like degenerate working class kid is always called Billy. Even this very day.
Yeah, you better ask our Billy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Billy's in the frame for that one.
Love it, yeah. And if that was in the States, he'd be wearing dungarees, wouldn't he? Michael, thank you very much indeed for that. Michael in Birmingham makes a good point as well. Debbie says, talent and ability don't mix anymore. You've just got to tick a box. That's why none of our public services work. You've just got to look at Lammy for the ultimate ticking box of a box. Well, you know, Lammy's interesting because, of course, he would have been, his constituency he would have been perfectly represented and therefore elected, I guess. We're talking Brent, of course. In terms of his position in the cabinet, that's a whole other ballgame. And you look at some of the titans that have existed as foreign secretary over the years, with brains the size of entire universes. The Rifkins of this world, forget whether you like them politically, and the like. And then we have David Lammy. What, he's the foreign secretary? Really? David? What, that David? Yeah, that David Lammy. 0344 499 1000. More from you on the way. We're looking at children committing crime, particularly in the wake of another case yesterday where a child pleaded guilty to the murder of another child. What is the rise, or what is behind the rise in child killers? It's not a comfortable conversation. It's quite difficult to have. Even psychiatrists and those that work in the area of crime, who we've spoken to in this show today, can't quite put their finger on it. But there's an increase. There is a demonstrable increase in numbers. Why? We'll look at another aspect of crime in a couple of moments that is absolutely on the increase. I'm talking shoplifting. Find out more coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 25 to 3. Let's move into this subject. Shoplifters are hitting stores at 3 times a minute, according to new figures, as the thefts surge across Britain. More than 519,000 cases were recorded in the year to last September. It's almost got a bit of a free pass now, it seems. Let's speak to Danny Shaw, police and crime and justice commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary. And of course, Danny, we have chatted many times on this. It's kind of interesting to me. When I was a kid, somebody shoplifting it wasn't murder, it wasn't, a violent assault, but it was pretty serious stuff. It does seem to have, without doubt, been relegated along the line. And one would assume so much so that those that indulge and carry out shoplifting feel a new sort of sense of, entitlement or the right to do it, because they kind of know that nobody seems to care.
I think over the past decade or so, I think there's been a focus on tackling the most serious offences, violent crime, and sexual offending as well. And I think that has drained police resources. Now, it's right that those are the most serious crimes that affect individuals and communities, and that they have to have appropriate resourcing. But I think what it's left is a bit of a gap where the sort of everyday crimes, phone snatches, burglaries, car theft and shop theft have been neglected and have been under-resourced. They happen in great volume, and obviously, not all of them can be solved. And as technology has made it harder to steal cars and made it, less worth it for criminals to break into cars and also break into homes, because we're carrying hundreds of pounds worth around with us with mobile phones and laptops. So you've seen crime patterns change. Obviously, there's been a big increase in online crime, and I think shoplifting has kind of slipped in there. It's suddenly become a thing, and the more it's done, the more people get away with it, and the more people see that, the more people do it. And I think that's why you've seen this explosion in shop theft over the past few years. And these figures released yesterday by the Office for National Statistics for England and Wales, showing 519,000 cases. I think that's 5% up on the same period last year. That's to the end of September 2025, are really shocking. The numbers, dip a little bit here and there or go up a bit here and there, but they're basically, the trajectory is upwards, and nothing that is done about it seems to make any difference.
Yeah, 3 thefts every minute, of course. And to compound all of this, Danny, often we see on social media, on YouTube and the like, you can watch these thefts being carried out. Some of the people even film themselves, and off they go into a shop, grab a load of, 500 quid's worth of beer or whatever, or some phones, and out they walk with an impotent security guard who is obviously instructed, don't try and tackle this person because you might end up getting attacked. And so out they go, and knowing full well that to get a police officer to a busy part of a town or city centre is going to be tricky. Unless they happen to be just outside, they're not likely to turn up, and the person, as long as they're got a balaclava on, is likely to get away with it.
Yeah, and I think one of the other problems is that shops are having to spend huge amounts of money on additional security measures, not just security guards, but also what you're seeing, I think, is even in Greggs, for example, they're actually locking away. They're locking away some of the items from thieves, and this is costing the stores, the retailers, huge sums. Now, some of the big supermarkets and so on could probably absorb that in their overall costings, but the smaller independent stores, how can they possibly make ends meet at the beginning, at the end of the week? Look, I think there are some successful police forces that are tackling this. Norfolk Police, I think, are doing a good job and have got a higher arrest and charge rate than other forces, because the police are working very closely with the retailers, and they're responding more quickly when there are reports. We're also seeing some pilots of facial recognition technology used by some businesses, and if businesses can share that kind of data, that information, so that they can stop known offenders from coming back to shops, that can help. You can't expect every offence to be investigated by every police officer. That's unrealistic. But this does need a concerted approach now to deal with this.
Indeed. Danny, thank you very much indeed. Danny Shaw, police and crime and justice commentator with us on the programme. And it clearly is, without any doubt, it is the emboldened nature of a shoplifter is because they've seen so many other shoplifters walk into places, nick the stuff and just walk out again. It's that. And if you go into a big supermarket, you might find, some fella with bandy legs who's about 5'2". I'm not trying to deliberately be facetious or insulting about a security guard, but if you see somebody like that, you know full well that if you walk out of Tesco with about 300 quid's worth of fillet steak, then this fella is unlikely to chase you down the road. And if you are disguised in some shape or form, then it's not likely you're going to be caught. And if the police were called, it's not likely they're going to turn up on time if they do. And that's what you face. A friend of mine runs he's a manager of a large supermarket. And he said it happens all the time, and very rarely, you know, the police, they call the police, say we've got someone, they've got 300 quid's worth of goods in a basket, they tried to walk out, we stop them, and these are occasions when you can actually stop them, because often they'll just leg it. You can't hold them physically. The police will say, is the person being, you know, disruptive or violent? Are they quite passive? And if you say, yeah, they're quite passive, they're just sitting here in the office, the police will say, OK, well, we might be able to send somebody out later this afternoon. And in the meantime, the tea leaf says, I'm going home. That's usually the end of that. How did we legalise theft in such a graphic way? On the issue of criminality, we began talking about childs committing crime and the worst kind of crime, of course. Nigel, down in London. What have you got for us, Nigel? Afternoon to you.
Well, good afternoon to you. I think we should rename every single police force in Great Britain the Keystone Cops, because they are fundamentally not fit for purpose. They are just redundantly useless.
Some might say that's a bit of a generalisation, Nigel.
Well, it is, but so is them not dealing with crime, a generalisation, but it's true. You know, they fail to deal with everyday crime. They don't attend offences, and they have a two-tier approach to policing. And I'm sorry, it's a fact across every single police service in this country, all 43 of them. But in relation to child crime, the difficulty is, it's a very simple answer. There's no deterrent to stop a child committing crime. Whether it starts with a home, but there's no legal deterrent because a child doesn't face any form of penalty or any form of punishment for what they do. And in America, they're dealt with far more severely, and judges also have the option to charge them or to try them as an adult.
But I'm always intrigued by the deterrent argument, because, of course, most criminals, child or adult, work on the assumption they're not going to get caught. So if that is the basis from which they begin, you have to reasonably assume that deterrents are irrelevant to their thinking, because they don't think they're going to get caught. And of course, if the kid that was found guilty or pleaded guilty yesterday to murder, that child probably knows whether he'd thought about it or not. We will never know. But if he gets caught, he's probably going to go to prison for, I think, the maximum life sentence for a kid of that age might be 20 years, I'm tempted to say, but it might be slightly less. It's certainly, I don't think it's any more. He would already know that, wouldn't he?
Yeah, but I think we have to look at it in a slightly more wider view than what you're suggesting. First of all, there are sentencing guidelines, and we know, and you know, and the people listening to your wonderful show know. There are sometimes people go to court, they're arrested, charged, go to court, and sometimes those offences are dispensed with in court. The Crown Prosecution Service offer no further action, or upon conviction, the judge gives them a much lesser sentence in accordance to the guidelines. It's only in the most...
Yeah, I never quite understand that either. But
yeah, I know. It's only in the most of extreme cases. Long sentences. Look, I wonder how many people in this country at the moment are actually serving a life order for murder. Yeah. Very, very few. And one could argue murder clearly is the most heinous of crime.
Indeed, that it would automatically carry that. Yeah, it is. I can't remember what the numbers are. There's been a couple of, Lucy Letby and people like that, but generally speaking, you don't get a whole life order.
Oh, and I think to say it goes back to when I discussed my opening market stall with you about shoplifting, for instance. If offenders are not arrested and charged and punished accordingly, they're going to go and do it again, so there's no deterrent.
There is no deterrent, yeah, and each time you're not caught, you are emboldened to carry out the crime again. Nigel, thank you very much indeed for that. Liam is in Plymouth on this same subject. Liam, afternoon to you.
Afternoon, Mr. Collins.
Hello.
I believe that a lot of the problems that we're facing nowadays is due to, like, social media, the music that children are listening to as well. It seems as if that, like, it's cool nowadays to be a gangster, to be a rapper, and that all carries the title of carrying knives, carrying guns, and it's just, if you think it's cool to carry a knife about, then obviously when a situation does arise, you've got the knife in your pocket, and then that ends up getting pulled out.
Yeah.
People end up getting killed, and then like what the previous caller said about deterrence. You see people get done for murder and they get given 12 years in prison, spend half of the time in prison, and it's like they're back out in 7 years. Do you know? There's no.
Yeah, there are some horrifically lenient sentences for murder. It does happen, and in some cases, I mean, crimes like rape. There are some exceptions where somebody hasn't even gone to jail.
The country's just turned to madness. I believe if we bring the death penalty back, and that'll soon start.
Well,
people's eyes.
I get it.
Waking people up to actually think, oh well, if I do this, I could potentially be killed. So.
Yeah. Well, no, yeah. Well, I wonder again, Liam. Thank you for your call, by the way, Liam in Plymouth. It kind of goes back to the same thing of a deterrent. Does a murderer, a potential murderer, go, well, I was going to murder that person, but I'm not going to because I might get executed. But at the moment, they also know they might get a whole life sentence in jail. So does that mean they're okay with that, but not the execution bit? I think deterrents are curious. Deterrents work for certain crimes or misdemeanours. You know, your parking ticket is sort of your obvious example where you might be deterred from parking in the wrong place because your £2 parking ticket will turn out to be 60 or 100 quid if you go over. There is oddly a sort of deterrent factor there. But when it comes to high crimes and, you know, horrendous acts of murder and this kind of thing, I'm not absolutely sure there is one. 0344 499 1000. More on that. What is behind the rise in child killers? We're talking about diversity, not just over at the BBC, but all over the media. But this particular report does look at the BBC. It's pretty scathing stuff about trying to crowbar people into roles just because of the colour of their skin or some other characteristic when they're not really historically or accurately suited to it. More on that as well. Lines are open. This is Talk.
Did say, no, the rights of the asylum seekers are above the rights of the British people.
Shabana Mahmood is going onto these media channels and saying that she's been, engaging with communities, engaging with police. She's engaged with no one.
The latest is that Brooklyn could be set to sign a 7-figure book deal, and it's the same publisher as Prince Harry's Spare. That makes me shudder.
And Mel B wasn't there. Scary wasn't there, so I'm going to step in. I'm here. I'm ready for it. Nigel, I'm sorry. I'm joining the Spice Girls.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. Welcome back. Before we go any further, we got the voice of doom. Is it day 7? 6, 7, 7. It's day 7. 6, 7. Yeah, let's not go there. Day 7. Mystery voice, but it's political, as I always seem to say. You're looking for somebody dead or alive, left wing, right wing, somewhere in the middle, who knows. One task to tell us, who is this?
This is your chance.
We'll hear it again.
This is your chance.
Very simply, message 87222 if you think you know who this is.
This is your chance.
And as ever, if we get a right answer, we'll tell you after the headlines. If we don't, rolls over to Monday. One more time.
This is your chance.
87222. Let's go back to your calls. Dan is in Liverpool. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing great, Ian.
Good.
How's yourself?
Yeah, good as gold at this end. What are you thinking?
Well, I think the real voice of doom is Keir Starmer, to be truthfully fair.
Well, that's a fair point, isn't it?
No, but I'd like to talk about when you were talking about misbehaving children and stuff, just because I know that there's been plenty of studies on actual gaming and child behaviour, and they've actually found that most video games don't impact child behaviour, and they've done it with even book studies.
Yeah. Go on, what do you make of it?
I think when it comes to, like, we look at cases back in the past, like John Venables and stuff like that, there weren't really video games, so it's almost like, are we ignoring what the real pressure is?
Yeah.
And maybe for me, I'm just saying this, I'm not a religious person, but maybe it's that little bit of lack of religion in the family household that brought it. You're a little bit older than myself. I'm 33. You're a lovely 40 years old, I would believe.
Yeah, 39, I'd like to think, but, you know, you're very generous.
Yeah. But maybe you can say it on better than I can. What was your experience when you were growing up as a young person? And was your background more religious, or did you believe more spiritual feeling?
There was well, we went to Sunday school for a little bit. There was always that. But I mean, my upbringing, which I think was the same as most people in our neck of the woods, was sort of your average, stereotypical working class upbringing, where, you know, it wasn't, nobody was really unemployed, everyone had a job, nobody had any money, but everybody had good standards. Everyone was clean and tidy, the kids went to school on time, generally speaking. So it was a nice time. And there was some dodge pots around, don't get me wrong, Dan.
Yes, I can understand that. Maybe it's just me, like, I can remember growing up and my mum would always take me and my sisters out, and she'd even just say, if I even have to give you one look, you seen when you're spoken to, you answer when you say, and you always say please and thank you.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of parents who want to be their kids' friends now, aren't they, rather than their parents?
Exactly, and I think that's what everyone's missing. I'm going to have to go, Ian. Sorry, I've got a next job to...
You go for it, Dan. I've got to go as well, because I've got to speak to Graham in Norwich. Dan, thank you very much indeed for that. This is Graham. How you doing, Graham?
All right, how you doing? You okay?
Yeah, good, thanks. What are you making of all this?
Well, I think the hint to the problem is in your headline, when you said the fact he enjoyed it. And that's the problem. He got an adrenaline rush out of doing it. It's about a power
Correct.
thing. And it's for teenagers. Now, there's nothing... When I was younger, I'm the same age as you, you remember you used to have a vibrant music scene where it's dancing, you used to dance and you used to drink when you were 16. And you remember that Madness song, The House of Fun, Welcome to the House of Fun, Now Come of Age.
Yeah.
Because it was all about... You had fun. But the kids of today have got absolutely nothing like that. It's all been, there's nothing for them. I used to play a lot of football. The adrenaline rush of going out and competing against your rival team. And the kids of today got nothing. And that's why this gangster, like that other chap was saying about the gangster thing, it makes them feel good. It makes them feel a part of something. It gives them an adrenaline rush. And it's part of the male hunter-gatherer brain, I think, that you need that adrenaline rush.
Yeah.
You need that adrenaline rush from flirting with the opposite sex, or whether it's...
But I mean, so this kid found that adrenaline rush through violence. And
obviously he did, because he attacked that old woman, didn't he?
Yeah, and he obviously did it, and they're the cases we know about. And there was probably other examples where, this child had no semblance of family or background or no kind of guidance or anything, and discovered one day while probably beating somebody up that it felt good rather than bad. Most of us would feel bad if you punched someone. You'd go to bed at night, you might not even sleep, would you? Go, it's terrible what I did to that person. But if you have the opposite effect...
He did feel guilty, though, because he came back to the crime scene and he tried to cover up, so he obviously knew that he was doing wrong.
But was that part of his kind of kick? You know, we've seen that before. We saw it with Ian Huntley, didn't we, when he gave interviews to the media.
Well, it's human nature, and you go back to Attila the Hun, or Genghis Khan, or Jack the Ripper. All these people get a kick out of what they're doing, and it's not because of social media or computer games or penny dreadful novels, they used to say in the time. It's none of that. It's because they've actually learned to get an actual power kick from having that power.
Yeah, and I think also, and it's not always the case, because this lad arguably acted, you know, completely on his own. But, you know, the sort of, when you start getting into the gang culture, you can go back to Victorian times, you know, and before that, I'm sure, where, you know, gangs did lurk. In the 60s, Clockwork Orange, you know, based on the shenanigans of, a group where violence was central to what they did and loved it. So it's not entirely new, but there's something about it that I sense has changed. Because by now we should be in a world, you and I should be having a conversation now, Graham, where we talk about, do you remember when there used to be murders? And we're not.
Yeah, but the human nature doesn't change, though, does it? You go back to the Victorian age, the scutters in Manchester, and the intelligentsia of the time said, well, why is this happening? Why are these young boys forming gangs and fighting each other? Because they enjoyed that conflict, but the people at the time, the intelligentsia, thought it was down to penny dreadful novels and bad parenting. Bad parenting is but it's fact that these young lads, because they lived in slums and they had no future, they needed some sort of excitement in their life, and they had no outlet other than fighting each other. Yeah. Young lads need an outlet. Like, I used to play football. If you play football, it's like tribal warfare, but it's great fun. And I drive around a lot, and I never see any young lads playing football anymore on the green. We used to always play football out on the green, but you never see it now.
Listen, on that point, Graham, thank you very much indeed. Don't go away, Ian. We'll talk to you just after the news, because we're about to hit the headlines. Don in Chelmsford says, we selected some bread rolls at the self-service checkout from photos. We chose a cheaper roll by mistake and called the shop assistant to correct it. Why did we bother to pay at all? Yeah, that's exactly what I would have done. Oh, look, my pepper appears to have been accepted as a prune. I don't know, whatever. You tend to just do that. But if you're brazen and you don't care, and standard slip, because I think the shoplifting thing has another effect. There's obviously the serial shoplifters who want to nick loads of money because they're going to, you know, sell the stuff and buy whatever they want to buy with their money, or they just do it for their shop, whatever. But then it kind of opens up another avenue of permission for the occasional shoplifter who, you know, lobs a kumquat into their pocket and doesn't pay for it. Yeah, you see, so that's your middle class lot. They're at it as well. 0344 499 1000, although they would melt if confronted by a security guard, I should say. We've got the voice of doom. Will we get a winner today? This is the voice.
This is your chance.
87222, if you know who that is right now, 3 o'clock. Let's get the headlines.
across the UK. On DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk Across.
Afternoon, yes, welcome back. It is the home of common sense. So much to talk about. We are discussing child crime, particularly child killers. This comes as a teenage killer who murdered a 12-year-old boy in Birmingham has been described by police as somebody who enjoyed hurting people. This is so deeply troubling, but this man who cannot be, or this boy who cannot be named for legal reasons, targeted deliberately vulnerable victims. Detectives say the attacks were violence for its own sake. What is behind the rise in child killers? And there has been a rise while overall murder rates have kind of plateaued. Details on that and more comment from you. Also this afternoon, the BBC has been urged to stop the box ticking when it comes to casting people. So terrified by the BBC of being accused of not being inclusive enough that they're doing all manner of weird stuff, like casting a black woman to play Henry VIII. And I'm only slightly exaggerating. Details on that. And as we mentioned earlier, councillors have revolted after Labour cancelled local elections for 4.6 million people. You have to let that figure sink in once in a while. They can come up with whatever reasons they believe they have. Oh, there's going to be new elections coming, so it's a waste of time. Sorry, it's a democracy. You had elections planned. Do the elections, please. Norfolk County Council has been hit by the resignation, in protest, and the leader of one council has also stepped down. Now, if that continues, there's going to be a real problem for the government. Everything you need to know, all the breaking news right here on Talk, 0344 499 1000. Let's have a listen. We're going to talk to William Atkinson in just a second. But on this very point, Labour insisting they're not cancelling elections as such. Let's have a listen to the local government secretary on this very point. He's Steve Reed.
To those who say we've cancelled all the elections, we haven't. To those who say it's all Labour councils, it isn't. I've asked, I've listened, and I've acted. No messing about, no playing politics, just getting on with the job of making local government work better for local people.
I mean, quite seriously, if you put that speech into your dissertation, you'd be kicked out of university for idiocy. That doesn't mean anything. I've listened and I've acted. Kind of the very reverse. Is this gaslighting? The very reverse of that, Mr. Reed, I would suggest. William Atkinson is assistant content editor at The Spectator. Good afternoon to you, William. Nice to have you with us. Could you work out what Mr. Reed was saying there? What did he really mean?
No, I couldn't. It was the usual meaningless guff that one's come to expect from this government. But I think the point to which he was vaguely trying to grasp was that this government hasn't, in a sense, permanently cancelled these elections. It's merely postponed them because of the local government reorganisation that ministers have embarked upon, in the sense that you won't be voting for your local council this year, but you will be voting for a new, improved, merged local council in a few years' time. But as you just laid out, the fundamental principle is one of democracy. Even if these councillors are only going to be sitting for a year or two, that's still a couple of years in which council services will be provided and people's council tax will be collected to pay for them, in which they wouldn't have had the opportunity to render their verdict on the current performance of their council.
And that is rather the point. Yeah, that's rather the point. I think Mr. Reed is listening. Nobody is suggesting that the government, as bad as they are, have cancelled the entire concept of elections. He seems to be responding as if that is the central accusation. No, it's these elections that have literally been cancelled on May the 7th this year. That's a fact. They are the elections we're referring to, and 4.6 million people won't get a vote. That's a reasonable point to be a bit grumpy if you were waiting and ready to go to the ballot box on May the 7th.
No, exactly. And I think there were sort of 63 separate councils affected by this ongoing reorganisation, and not even half of those have requested to postpone. So what I want to know is why were almost half the councils feeling, and they were not in a position, in order to hold the elections, while the other half were, what was going on differently with these councils. And I think even then, if they say they are struggling, if they say they need further support, the government should step in and provide that. Ultimately, you can't put a price on democracy, which is clearly what ministers are currently suggesting with their desire to postpone these elections.
Indeed. If many more resignations take place, and if we're having council leaders stepping down and other people across the board, this could be a very real headache for the government.
Definitely. I mean, if you say that there's a sort of political interest in not hosting these elections across both of the two major parties because they fear they're going to once again face a shellacking from Reform UK, they'll also have a headache if they have to continually start finding new council leaders or new councillors because of by-elections triggered by their decision to step down. And I think it's just embarrassing because if you've got councillors themselves who are upset at the decisions being taken by their council leaders and by the government, especially when they are sort of Labour members as well, you are making that fundamental point, that is the government is denying democracy and the people should have their opportunity to vote on those who are taxing them and providing them with usually very crummy local government services.
Yeah, very crummy being absolutely bang on. William, thank you very much, sir, for your time. William Atkinson is the assistant content editor at The Spectator. More comment from you. James says, bringing back the death penalty would be a backward step for the UK. If a civilised country wants to declare a moral standard that murder is the worst possible crime, then they cannot use state-sanctioned murder as a threat of retribution. It's hypocritical. I mean, there's always that moral dilemma. You've done the worst thing possible, so the worst thing that a human can do. So, as a result, we're going to do it to you. I get that argument. I don't think it acts as a deterrent. There is some slightly deeper arguments that the state has a responsibility to remove people from the gene pool who are surplus to requirements, and that's, ethically speaking, that's a really tricky area. But an interesting debate. James says, I would also trust the state to solve... I wouldn't trust the state to solve crimes accurately enough to have corporal punishment or capital punishment, I think he means, on the table. Yeah, I mean, that's arguably got better as DNA and other scientific forensic advances have gathered pace. But yeah, not always and never will always be perfect. With regards to stopping what are considered petty crimes like shoplifting, deal with them hard and have a zero-tolerance approach to petty crime and social nuisances. It will bring back trust between the public and the police, and we'll see fewer crimes in general. It's the broken windows policy, isn't it? If you get tough on that kind of stuff, then and employ logic, and we don't arrest people who are campaigning or said something on social media. I know there's a line, we all understand it, there is a line, but if you're saying something that might be uncomfortable, it might to some people be upset. I don't care if somebody's words are uncomfortable or upsetting. I genuinely don't care. If they're controversial, I don't care. Do I want my police going out there and cuffing people because they said something that's a bit off? Absolutely not. That's a waste of everybody's time. I saw a video the other day of a fella who was campaigning, I think outside a university, and yeah, all right, you could argue he knew that he was in a place where some people might be upset. Anyway, he got attacked, and of course, the police eventually came, and he was the one that got arrested. I don't know what the upshot of that case was. When you start the video, I thought, I know how this ends. I've seen it so many times. And it did. I wonder what the upshot of that is. And people getting arrested because they might be a bit louder, they might question why they're being questioned, and then somebody in the police goes, oh, you're too much trouble, you're under arrest, etc. That doesn't mean that there's no such thing as lines where if you cross them, then you will get a knock on the door. So I would agree with James. I think those kind of what are seen as sometimes petty crimes, and shoplifting isn't a petty crime, of course, and certainly for independent shopkeepers, it's their entire livelihood. It's gone. Come down on those people. Was it Bill Browder, the former head cop in New York? Was it not Bill Browder? Bill Browder's the Magnitsky guy. It's Bill, Putin's number one enemy. I think it's Bill somebody. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The point is, I think he was the one who came up with the broken windows thing, and it did work, and it worked on a number. Bill Bratton, that's it, that's your man. I knew it was a double B. Him, he knew all about the broken windows. Let's go to Ian down in London. On shoplifting and criminality, Ian, what have you got for us? Hi.
Oh, hold on.
I'm holding.
Hi, Ian.
Hello.
Right. Hello. Me again. Right. It's, you say like petty crimes and everything. What is petty? It's like, you know, oh, marijuana is a petty drug. Don't worry about it. But it's a snowball effect. But really what annoys me is that this all goes down to, over the last 4 or 5 years or even longer, that the police are no longer there. You don't. The criminals are not scared of the police because, as they were saying yesterday on one of the shows, the police are no longer in the city centres because they're around the hotels making sure the illegal immigrants don't get out, or they're around these armoured barracks now to make sure. It's just, there is nothing. It's like they're not, you know, you go to a hospital on any Friday or Saturday night or any night, there might be 5 coppers looking after one guy who's gone off his head. Right, so they're not on the streets anymore.
But were they ever? I mean, there's only ever been a certain amount of cops in any one place, hasn't there?
Yeah, but it was always, you might have thought that there was more because you'd see them walking around, or you'd see them coming around the schools, or there'd be the local bobby or whatever. Right, and it wasn't it was originally like, and showing my age, the Dixon of Dock Green and Evening All and that sort of thing, but they were being shown up. But now, as you say, working in a shop, you'd know to catch a shoplifter. You've got to be joking. The guys are there. They're sort of like the security guards are there with stab vests on and everything else, but they still don't want to go near any of them because basically, why should they, for £5, £6 an hour, put their lives? You know, the guy that was on the bus, fantastic to him, fantastic that he did that, and I feel sorry. But the bosses are sort of bad.
Was it the fact that he gave was it because he gave the guy a punch? Was that the real problem?
I don't think it was. I think
he said really... he didn't what's the word, land the first punch. I think that was his argument.
Yeah, the guy took a dig at him.
So he responded in self-defence.
Responded self-defence.
Yeah.
But the whole thing is that, quite simply, the firms don't want to know because their feeling is possibly that every other bus driver has also got to come to the aid of their passengers. And they don't want it. It's the same thing on airlines. You know, when you get these drunken passengers get on board on the flights, and like the stewardess and everything else, and she gets abused by them. There is no, I was saying to somebody today, like, there is no respect for anybody anymore.
Yeah, everybody's got a, I don't know, we've redefined something that would normally have taken, I'd say this kind of stuff like I know what I'm really talking about, but thinking off the top of my head, Ian, stuff that would have taken maybe thousands of years to, where the human condition kind of changes, whether they are physical characteristics or whether they're a mentality. We seem to have changed in about 20 years. There's a lot of stuff in the last 2 decades have happened that are not particularly positive.
I always used to say to people when I was doing a different job selling training courses to people, and I used to go to see people that would come over from like Africa, and I used to say to them, and they used to say to me, you're right, Africa was trying to catch up with Europe, that Europe had done over in 2,000 years, the African continent was doing in 40 years. And it's just like we've got, as you say, where we got to in 2,000 years, overnight we've gone backwards.
Yeah, and also, by this stage in the human journey, 2026, life should not be more violent and more expensive. Just both of those 2 points. We should not be at a stage now where it's more expensive to live than it was 30, 40 years ago. That is just madness. So something's gone wrong with the entire economic system, and then on the social system, loads of things have gone wrong. And we talk about kids and knife crime. They talk about murder being not as the figures have plateaued. However, attempted murder and knife crime are still through the roof. People survive murders now thanks to medical interventions that didn't exist before. So we can say that murder has plateaued. I think we're more violent as a society and we're more expensive. And those 2 things are absolutely, it's reprehensible that we would be in this place in 2026. Ian, thank you very much indeed for that. Good man. This comes from Brian, who says... is that Brian or Brian? Okay, I don't know who it's from. Says, You'll understand why I said Brian in a second. Back in the day, teenagers used to get their kicks from music, sex and pubs and playing football. All are now frowned upon or inaccessible, but teenagers still need to find excitement in life, so it comes out in ways that are unpalatable. Endorphins are the primal driver of the hunter-gatherer brain. Brain, which I mistook for Brian. Don't know who it's from, but I like the point. Kids do still play football. I mean, if you drive around an estate, you will still see kids playing football. And kids do still other stuff. You know, my lad went fishing last week. He went fishing, for God's sake, because a mate of his and his dad went fishing. I couldn't believe it. Off he went with a little rod and everything, and went to pick him up later. What did he caught? Nothing. It's a national embarrassment. But, you know, I've got to face that. I've got to go into the pub. What did your boy catch? Nothing. So I said to him, if you want to appear on the biggest catch, mate, you've got to do better than that. But he went fishing. That was the point. And you don't see that a lot anymore. But football, I think it's still out there. It just depends on whether you live in a place where you can access a game of football. 0344 499 1000. Let's quickly do the voice of doom. We've got a great guest coming up after the news. Stand by for that. Voice of doom. This is the voice we played you before the news.
This is your chance.
It's gone on for 7 days. Who is that? Is it no? Boris Johnson, no. Rupert Lowe, no. These are some of the wrong answers. Tony Newton, Cecil Parkinson, Richard Ryder, Nadeem Zahawi, no, 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 and no. Tom Tugendhat, Tony Benn, Kevin Hollandrake, no, it is not. Norman Lamont, no. David Liddington, no. We haven't got a right answer, which means it rolls over to Monday. Stand by for that. Join us after the break. Hannah Pearl Davis will join us, host of Just Pearly Things. She has some very interesting views on things like feminism and the like. Stand by for that, coming next.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's speak now with Pearl Davis, an American YouTuber, political commentator, self-described anti-feminist, known for challenging modern dating, opposing divorce, arguing that society encourages women to be terrible. Pearl, nice to have you with us. Good to see you. We did actually meet about a year or so ago, because you were in this building. I think you were on with Piers, weren't you, about 18 months back?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
You don't remember Piers Morgan? Nobody can forget him.
No, I remember Pierce. Is he doing well? He's in the hospital,
Well,
isn't he?
he did. He broke his hip, but he's still back doing it, though. You know, nothing stops Morgan from functioning. That's the...
He's still going?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
It'd be great. He'll be so happy to know he's still going. I'll pass on your love to him. Listen, I mean, we had many reasons we wanted to talk to you. You're not orthodox in the conventional sense. A lot of people are fascinated when somebody calls themselves anti-feminist. Just tell us, what is an anti-feminist? And if you had to write that out as a paragraph, what would it look like?
What's the right term? I would say I would describe what's going on. And right now, feminism has given women a lot of power in society, and all of society is crumbling because of it. You can see this in family court. Most men don't have access to their children after following a divorce. You can see this just in like the behavior of women in society. Essentially, we're just drunk on power. Anti-feminist, the challenge with that term, it kind of assumes you can do something about it. And the world's kind of going the way it's going, and there's nothing you can do.
So many would just simply say, no, hang on, Pearl, this is equality. It's just equality. Years ago, you go back to the 60s, you can go back further than that. Women didn't have the vote. Women stayed at home. Now women have careers. And this is, of course, you know, in our lifetimes, that's now the norm.
I don't really like that view of history, because when you think about it, you know, we always talk about how women don't have, like, they always say my body, my choice, right? But historically, men had no choice what to do with their body if they were drafted, right? I mean, like, they would literally be rounded up and sent to die in war. So I don't know why we have this idea that women, like, in a way, we were a protected class because we didn't have to fight and die to maintain civilization. Men had to do that.
Yeah.
Like, you could argue men were more oppressed than women. You know, because, like, what our oppression is cooking and cleaning, really? And that's really what I'm getting at is it's just to the point where women are spoiled brats. I did a show the other day, and I'm just like, what more do feminists want? You don't have to cook. There's Uber Eats. You have every reproductive right. Like in the UK, you have abortion up to 6 months. How much more time do you need, ladies? That's insane. Like, that's crazy. And they say it's about equality, but then why don't men have equal rights when it comes to their kids?
Yeah.
Why isn't it 50-50 custody, no child support, no alimony?
Is that still the same in the States as well? Because certainly over here there's big issues around that.
Yeah, I mean, it's everywhere. I've done interviews on that topic in like Ireland, here. I've had there's a guy in India who actually filmed like a 60-minute video detailing how he was going to kill himself, and he was doing it because of family court. Like, this happens everywhere. So essentially, feminism, what they want to do is they want men to fund their lifestyle. And so they do that either through the government benefits, through taxes, child support, alimony, and then they still claim and say that they're oppressed. So.
Yeah, it is. It's a curious claim to make, isn't it? After a man's just lost his children, it's rather sort of bizarre. But you're right. I mean, it is definitely tilted in a curious direction. Some would say, however, you know, nonetheless, it all comes back to yes. If you want to be a housewife and a homemaker, as I think the fancy phrase now is, then what's wrong with that? You know, that's great if you want to, but if you don't want to, what's wrong with that as well?
Well, there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but the challenge is women tend to make their problem everybody's problem. So if you want to work and work for a lifetime, that's fine, but women make 85% of consumer buying decisions. And when you think about it, that's especially insane because we're close to equal on the pay gap. So we spend money we don't have. And so essentially, like, what women do is they run out of money in their late 20s, early 30s. They have college debt in the U.S. Then they marry a guy to pay it off, divorce him, and then he pays for the rest of their life.
Yeah. A man never ever picked his own kitchen, right?
He never, I don't know that term.
No, literally picked his own kitchen. You said women make most of those kind of consumable decisions, and that would be true. And I guess also across other areas of a relationship, things like divorce, which is another element that I know you've talked about. Divorce should be illegal. Did you really say that?
Yeah, I did. I did update my opinion, mostly because so many men are tortured in marriage, where they're not getting sex. Their wife has gained a ton of weight. She's just kind of being a bitch, right? And so I was like, do you know what? I don't think those men should be tortured for a lifetime. So I changed my opinion on that.
So, yeah, so is putting on weight a reason for divorce in that case?
No, because women are the ones gaining more weight.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a lot of big guys out there, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing. I mean, just in my experience, a lot of times the men are kind of held back by the women because, like, the women tend to have worse eating habits than the men. It's partially because they have higher testosterone, or men have higher testosterone, so women crave sugar more.
Right.
So they're the ones bringing the Uber Eats into the house. They're the ones, like, women bake, men don't really bake.
So it's a basic issue then of, so that's a physical, visual thing, right? I mean, that's some would say a superficial issue. If a woman is, has put on weight, but you still love her, does it matter if she's a little bigger than she was when you first met?
Well, it doesn't matter to men. Men kind of get wife goggles, to be fair, but women are the ones divorcing. So it's not even a reason for divorce, really.
What about the voting issue? Because I know you've talked about this before, about women having the vote. Women never used to have the vote. Some men never used to have the vote either. Where do you still stand on that, Pearl?
Well, I'm an egalitarian, so I say give women have been complaining for 50 years for equality, so give them the equality they asked for, and that goes with voting. In the United States, men are fined $250,000 if they don't sign up for selective service, and women don't have to do that. So the reason women didn't vote historically is because men were expected to go to war and be drafted. You're voting for your commander in chief. So if you're not 50% of the military and 50% of the front lines, you're not really equal, are you?
What about the future then of all of this? I mean, you know, do you part of what you said at the beginning sounded like that you were resigned to the fact that the battle that you believe needs to be fought has kind of been lost. So is that it?
I mean, conservatives lost. It's cooked. We're done. I don't like to sell hope. I watched a lot of conservatives do that the past decade, and in my lifetime, OnlyFans has become normal. Like, so you're obviously not winning. If I think it's like 10% of women between 18 to 25 are on OnlyFans. If you include women that are on sugar baby websites, if you include, you know, like straight prostitution websites, I have people that have estimated it's like 25% of women under 25.
Wow.
So
I do find.
How can I say? How can I say we're winning?
Well, I was going to talk about social media, but I do find it interesting that we live in this kind of bizarre world of conflicting messages, where we're talking, you know, don't objectify women, and we've never to look at a woman in a way that might be more than, you know, you might be sizing a woman up and thinking, I quite fancy this one. Or whatever. All of that stuff is almost illegal. It'll land you in jail, pretty much. And yet we are simultaneously in a world where we've never seen more people take their clothes off.
Yeah, for sure. What you're going to see is women spend money even when we don't have it. So this allows everybody to raise the price of everything. It's why college is so expensive in America, because even if it's 6 figures of college debt, women will still buy it. So then what happens is the women, we rack up a bunch of debt, and then how do we pay it? It's either marriage or sex work. And based on women's choices, women would rather be sex workers than wives.
Do you think social media, just to extend that, I don't know whether we would call OnlyFans social media, but it's a form of, I guess, under a similar umbrella. Where do you place social media as a general thing in terms of how it's influenced the society we currently live in?
Yeah, well, it's a pipeline. So the challenge is young women now, you know, sorry, there's an ambulance going by. All
right.
The challenge you get is when women have social media followings, which is it's pretty normal. That's the new world. They have the opportunity to start an OnlyFans and make a bunch of money. Not all of them do, but it's also a funnel into sugar babies, getting flown out, and just like promiscuous activities. And you see this a lot when women's social media careers are, dwindling. You see them dropping OnlyFans. So,
can society be saved then? I mean, are you still, Pearl, the flag waver for the change that you crave? And are you someone who isn't all of the things that you clearly detest?
Well, I can't change the way society is. I don't have political power, right? I'm not a politician. I'm not in the government. So I just don't predict it's going to get better. I don't see any indication that the trends are going to change.
But do you think as a woman,
years,
but I was going to say, do you think as a woman that you should be, is your place in the home, is your place as a homemaker, is your place to please your husband, is your place to be the person that spends but doesn't earn? Is that your disposition?
I mean, it doesn't matter what it is or it isn't, right? What my place is or isn't or should be. Like, should is just Make-A-Wish. And we have the society that we have.
But what is your wish?
I think that's a waste of time. So this is the way society's going.
So we've lost. Your battle is lost. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, unfortunately.
You got to think of another job then. I mean,
well, you gotta. Oh no, I'll be employed forever because I'm going to cover this stuff.
Yeah.
But just like you will. But here's the challenge. Women make 85% of consumer buying decisions, meaning all of the companies have to think, do I want to make $8 or do I want to make $2? Everybody's going to pick 8. Nobody's going to stop. They're going to say, I want to make $2 out of virtue. No. So that's going to make everybody have to lie to women. In order to, like, when you lie, women buy. You'll be young forever. Here's Botox, right? Here's the clothes. I mean, it's actually incredible that we spend 85% of consumer buying decisions are women, even though we make less than men. Like, think about that.
Do women make
we
much
spend
less?
So much money?
But do women make much less than men these days? I mean,
we spend way more. That's the point. It's very close, but we spend way more. And you can see it. Come on, I don't know if you're married, but like every married guy knows his wife runs his credit card more than he does.
Well, that's why I mentioned. That's why I mentioned the kitchen point earlier. That I don't think you quite picked up on. That when it comes to spending out money, then you will normally find that the woman of the house will select which kitchen you have in terms of
that's so not true.
Well, I think that's arguably true.
Not.
Well, I'm trying to feed into what you're saying. Are you saying that?
No, I'm saying I've interviewed.
So now you're contradicting yourself.
No, I've interviewed 1,000 women in London. Women cannot across the board cook. If anything, I see more men that can cook now than women.
No, I don't mean cook. I mean select the kitchen that you want to buy for your house. I'm struggling with the kitchen reference here.
Oh, sorry, I'm over my head.
Don't worry. It's called a kitchen. It's got a cooker and a counter and stuff in it. Those things. So in terms of where you go next, you continue this fight for a more conservative world, or you just talk about how we never got there, despite all of the voices who are hankering for it, the late Charlie Kirk, people such as that that have done the rounds, have huge media followings, who would agree with much of what you say. The battle is lost, and your job now is just to talk about how it's lost.
I mean, I can't in good faith sell that dream. And a lot of them are part of the problem in a way. I mean, a lot of them are platforming women that are not really, like, instead of platforming smart, intelligent men, like they've had porn stars on their platform. Nicki Minaj, I think, is in the White House now. What credibility does she have to be there? But would they have to pander to women? When you start to see like influencers enter a niche or space, it usually means they're pandering to women because men care about men that are competent, where women care about who's popular. So they're part of it. And I can't in good faith sell that dream. I can't.
No, I hear you. Pearl, listen, great to have you on with us. We will speak again. Enjoy your day. Pearl Davis, host of Just Pearly Things, on a whole range of issues there. Couldn't quite explain the kitchen thing. But hey, Maybe it's a language barrier. Maybe women are just better at not listening to kitchen conversations than men. 0344 499 1000. Back with more from you coming next on Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk 22-4. This comes from Joanna, who says, Pearl didn't get it. Men went to war. Women lost their sons or died in childbirth. They paid in a different way to keep the species going. That's a really good point. Pearl does kind of divide the room. And it's interesting that she believes now that the kind of battle is over. Many women would say, well, the battle has kind of been won. I don't think that... Mark says, the American lady you're chatting to is 100% marriage material. Robbie says, your anti-feminist guest sounds so right and so wrong at the same time. I'm confused. Whereas it's really hard to pronounce that, Kolukoka says, why do you listen to what Pearl Davis is saying? In her own opinion, she's just a woman. She would have no say and go back to the kitchen. Well, I'm not sure she knows what a kitchen is in that respect, which is a fair point. And Rebecca says, who the hell is this daft Pearl Davis? What a load of old mealy-mouthed psycho nonsense. She needs to come back in 20 years when she's grown up. Yeah. A room divider, I think it is. I was just surprised because as I mentioned at the beginning, I didn't really meet her. I bumped into her in the green room about 18 months ago on talkTV, and she was on Piers' show, and she was on talking about, I think it was a specific element of feminism and how she was an anti-feminist. I think there was more of a specific reason. And I'd sort of from afar watched some of her posts develop over time and wondered, where is this woman now? Because it's a fairly, I wouldn't say it's outrageous. If she wants to believe that a woman's place is better served in the home and a man is the risk taker, the wage earner, and while the woman simultaneously is the spender and the one that makes the decisions, that's fine. If you believe that and you can cohabit with a partner and you're both on board with the same thing, so what? That's fine. And I find that an interesting position. It's not a very 21st century one in the Western world. However, has she changed? No, she hasn't really changed, but now considers she's lost the battle. And also this afternoon, the London bus driver who's been sacked after abandoning his bus to chase a thief who'd just snatched a necklace from a passenger. Mark here, I think his name is, was driving the 206 from Wembley to Maida Vale, that's down in London, when he saw the robbery unfold. He decided to act and is now lost his job. Let's speak with Richard Holden, Shadow Transport Secretary. It's interesting, Richard, isn't it? When you become a politician, you know you're going to be dealing with constituency issues. Who would have thought somebody had phoned you up and asked you to talk about a bus driver who's just been fired because he protected a woman who's had her necklace nicked? Strange times we live in, but it is a transport-based issue, of course, and you are Shadow Transport Secretary. You've seen the story, you know the story, Richard. Where do you stand on this?
I just think it sounds absolutely crazy to me that we've got a situation in which a bus company is firing one of its own employees for standing up for its customers. Even in this case, the police said that the bus driver used totally reasonable force, totally acted within the law, yet the bus company has decided that because the bus driver touched one of their customers, i.e. the thief, that they've decided to fire him. And the employment tribunal has unbelievably gone along with the idea that they were within their rights to do it. I just find the entire situation quite unbelievable. And quite frankly, the Mayor of London, who is responsible for London's buses, and who Metrolink operate as a franchise operator of, I think he should intervene here and say, look, this is totally unacceptable. Either give him his job back, or if he doesn't want his job back, give him some adequate compensation for forcing him out of his job for totally unbelievable reasons.
Yeah, and it might be unconventional. Life is full of unconventional things. He wouldn't, on any other day of the week, necessarily have thought, I'm just going to leave my bus running with passengers on it. And I know that's not ideal, but the idea that you remove a man's livelihood when the underpinning reason for this happening, Richard, was that he was going to help a victim of crime. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, a victim of crime on the bus, right? This was a victim of crime on the bus, and he was there looking after his passengers. I think a lot of female passengers particularly will already feel that they are under threat sometimes on buses, and they want to know that the driver's there to stand up for them. And I think the fact that Metrolink are actually sacking somebody who's clearly a good guy, who's going to stood up for his passengers against a thief on the bus, I think it will also make people think twice about travelling on buses if they feel that, people can't even stand up for me because they'll get sacked for doing so.
Quite extraordinary. And it seems that there is, other than, I don't know, trying to get a reinstatement petition, which we know that has begun, I guess you're sort of out of options, because a private bus company, if they don't want, unless you've been unfairly dismissed, he would have to sort of take that action, I guess, and that might be full of bear traps and financial implications if he wants to go down that route.
Well, that's what he's tried to do, and there's a GoFundMe page, so I'd urge people to have a look at that. He's also this petition, but I think this is really incumbent on the Mayor of London, who all the bus companies are franchisees of, including Metrolink. And I think that he should phone up the Metrolink guys and say, reinstate this guy, or if he doesn't want to work for you, help him find a job with another bus company and give him some compensation for all the crap you've put him through, because I think it's totally unacceptable that when a public servant steps up to the mark, goes above and beyond, is praised by the police in the employment tribunal for his actions, that he should be penalised for it. And I think actually it's a bit of an indictment actually of the way that Transport for London under this Mayor of London is being run, that people who do the right thing are getting punished, and it's the thieves that are the ones who get rewarded.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. Richard, thank you very much, sir, for your time. Richard Holden, MP, Shadow Transport Secretary. Becker says he got sacked for leaving the bus running and unattended, not for the punch. Indeed, he did. However, one might reasonably argue that in the circumstances where he'd seen a crime and he chases after the criminal, it's not ideal. And he should have been told, look, mate, instinctively you acted and you did what you thought was best, but you did leave a bus running with passengers. That's also not ideal. I don't know whether you have to remove his livelihood as a result of that. I mean, there's lots of things in life where I do wonder why we remove someone's livelihood because they happen to have a different opinion or did something once. Does it have to go there? Could it not just be a case of, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do, fella, where, we shake your hand for trying to solve a crime, but we're going to have to give you a little bit of a verbal warning over the bus ride. It could have been that. So unless this guy was hopeless, but from what I understand, he'd worked for the company for a few years, so he wasn't like a complete newbie on this. I think underpinning it all was a bloke that was trying to solve a crime and help somebody who'd been a victim of crime. And that has to, I think, take precedence over whether he broke the company rules about removing his ignition key. Our lines are open, 0344 499 1000. On the issue of child killers, where we began this afternoon, Cindy in Michigan. Cindy, what have you got for us? Good afternoon to you.
Hi, Ian. Good afternoon. Yes, children have more access these days to the cell phone, which in turn there's violence on the cell phone. There's video games, pornography, and these things are just nowadays so children are numb to it.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think, I mean, what's going on? Is it, I mean, in the States, I'm sure the same arguments are out there when we see horrendous, you know, Netflix is full of these programs that, you know, talk about the awful, horrific journey of a kid that carries out terrible crimes. So it's not limited to one particular country. Is it a Western existence thing?
I think it is. I think it is because, like, in other countries, in third world countries, they don't have cell phones. They don't have video games. And the violence is everywhere. Yeah. Violence is on TV. It's acceptable too, it seems.
What do we do? We should all go and live in the forest or something. You know, live with nature.
No.
Is that the, no? But I like that idea. I like that. Have a couple of goats and some chickens. What's wrong with that?
Sure, okay, but I think that parents need to take more responsibility also with what the things that they allow their children to do and watch.
100%, and I cannot in any way disagree with that, because I know what it's like with kids. My own kids, they are different when they're not looking at a screen, and I don't mean in that specific moment. If you have a whole day when they've gone out, they played football, they've gone to, you know, I don't know, a mate's birthday party, they've then done something else and haven't had screens all day, they are different kids than if they do have screens. That is a absolute grade A fact.
I bet I know something about you too. Watch. I bet you that you give your kids limited time on the screen. Don't you?
They're on it all day long. No, they're not. You're right. Yeah, we try. I tell you, of course, there's a limit, but watching the reaction when it comes to the limit is really quite something. It's almost like you've removed somebody's toes.
Yeah, I bet. And I said what I said because I imagine you are an excellent parent, by the way.
Well, give it a good go. You know what it's like. You do your best. You do your best. I'm obviously super cool, Dad. Love it. Cindy, have a lovely weekend. Thank you very much indeed for that, Cindy in Michigan. Great call and laugh as well. Thank you to Cindy. It's true. Every parent knows this. You do your best. You give it as much as you can. Sometimes you can get lazy around an iPad. And sometimes, by the way, like, here's a weird thing with kids. So my youngest almost prefers watching a TV play. He's got a bloody great big TV in the living room in front of him that he can sit and watch. And he will sit on the sofa. He would rather watch the same programme on his iPad, which is, you can't really explain this to a 7-year-old. It's like, well, why, you know, you've got a 40-odd inch screen there with nice sound and everything, or this tinny little iPad. It's not even a big iPad, it's an iPad mini. And you're looking at that, really? How is that preferable to that? You can't, no. It's something about holding it, and I suppose if they want to swap programs, you know, they've got that kind of option. But yeah, taking an iPad off a child who's engrossed in something is literally like taking a pie off somebody who hasn't eaten for 3 weeks. It's crazy. 0344 499 1000. We'll have more from you coming next on Talk.
him off.
We're all paying more at the till for this epidemic of shoplifting. And of course, many of the major retailers these days have what they call non-intervention policies for their security staff. So they are actually instructed not to intervene, other than perhaps the very, very basic of stopping somebody, asking them to return the goods. And if they don't, they simply walk out with impunity.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on your mobile, and on your side. This is Talk.
It is Talk. Let's go to more of your calls. Oh, this one from Rob, who says, great show. Just heard Mr. Starmer is representing the necklace thief. I'm going back to law. Maybe he is. One in from Ashton says, but please, I won't read that out again because it says, please don't give my name out. So I won't go any further on the message. This from Georgina down in London. Georgina, hello.
Hello, Ian.
Hi.
I'm thinking about the subject of changing our historical fact into historical fiction by the BBC.
Yeah.
It's got to stop. History is something that has already happened. It cannot and should not be adapted to fit into the cultural diversity narrative.
Yeah.
This confuses our children who are learning about our history, and also people who are watching this claptrap who think that this is how our history actually was. Shoehorning people of colour or transgender into prominent leading roles when in reality the leading historical character was actually white is both embarrassing and farcical and historically inaccurate. And what are these production companies and producers trying to prove? That they're woke and diverse? Or are they trying to do it for shock value to get more exposure for the pathetic productions? We've had one of our most famous queens, Anne Boleyn, played by a woman of colour, and now being played by a transgender male, someone who until recently had a tallywhacker and an Adam's apple, playing in a production that by all accounts should be women. And he's playing a woman whose life was, to say the least, tragic, and who was put to death in an even more tragic way. Leave our Queen's memory intact and without this perversion of our historical past. Is nothing of our British culture sacred or safe from the manipulation of wokery? Are we not allowed, Ian, even to be able to keep our own British history factual without having to manipulate it and to have it manifest into some kind of caricature of what it actually was, just for the sake of inclusion and diversity? Leave our historical past alone, BBC. We are proud of our history and our culture, and we do not need it messing about with by dolly do-gooder, lefty-lovey, woke, diverse-seeking busybodies who have nothing better to do with their time.
I like it. As ever, great monologue. Georgina down in London. Let's speak to Kevin O'Sullivan, who was once played by Sylvia Sims.
I was indeed, yeah.
And that was diversity back in the 50s.
Well, actually, I was Sylvia Sims.
Yeah, sorry,
I now identify as a man.
Yeah, that's true. Great journey you've been on,
but
Kev,
not a very good one, actually. But I do my best.
What's going on, Kev?
We're going to start off with the battle for Birmingham. We had two local Muslim activists on my show last night, and they revealed that they are going to field 60 independent candidates for the council elections in May. 60, more than 60.
And they're standing from a religious perspective.
Well, they are standing as independents. Make of that what you will.
But a guy on the video clip was talking about Allah and all sorts of things.
But I asked, and their hatred of Zionists, their belief that not only was it right that Jewish football fans were banned from Aston Villa, they should be banned from all sporting events, etc., etc. Nice. Arguably, anti-Semitism in its worst form. They would deny that, of course. So the battle for Birmingham is the battle for Britain's soul. If they win all those seats, that will be the Islamification of that great city. So we are at the crossroads, folks. Also, we will be dealing with what Georgina was just talking about, the BBC. Colourblind casting. In fairness to the BBC, it's not just them. All of them do.
No, this is right across the board.
Who can forget the Channel 5 legendary series of Anne Boleyn?